Chapter 1201. Shun Julie could feel that Ning Shuima's gaze was constantly on him. She was also repulsed by Shui Ilan's intimacy with her. This woman was forced. She wasn't willing to be with Shui Ilan. When he realized this, he actually felt very gratified. At the beginning of this operation, he had already decided to snatch her away. Now that she was finally in his arms, he actually didn't feel very uncomfortable hugging her like this. There was a faint fragrance on her body, and he felt very comfortable just by smelling it. He looked at her old face and felt that something was wrong. "What's your original appearance? Just like now?" Every time Shui Ilan brought her out, he would change her appearance. It was different every time. However, there was one thing in common. Her appearance had always been old and ugly. She was like a withered green leaf, which set off Shui Ilan's big red flower very well. After seeing so many, Shun Julie felt that this woman shouldn't be beautiful. Maybe she was really old. After all, it would take at least 50 to 60 years for a human to cultivate to Earth rank level 8. Therefore, this woman should be around 70 to 80 years old. It was reasonable for her to look older. Ning Shuima raised her eyebrows. Original appearance? What a joke! She wasn't that old. She quickly shook her head. "This isn't my original appearance. Shui Ilan changed my appearance." "Then what's your original appearance? Older than now?" Shun Julie was a little curious. Ning Shuima was speechless. She said bluntly, "How is that possible? My original appearance is that of a 16-year-old beauty. I'm very beautiful." She looked at him again. "I'm not much worse than you, Guru." This woman wasn't just confident. She was even a little narcissistic, but it wasn't disgusting. Yunqi finally caught up from behind. She was stepping on a cloud, so her speed wasn't as fast as Shun Julie's. She could only shout from behind, "Julie, wait for me." Ning Shuima's body stiffened. Julie? What an intimate form of address. She vaguely remembered that Yunqi had always addressed the Almighty as Dizwa and Sir outside. When had she become so close to the Almighty? Shun Julie felt the body of the person in his arms stiffen. He lowered his head and glanced at her. Ning Shuima, however, looked away and did not look at him. Sensing that Shun Julie's speed had slowed down, Yunqi's tense face finally broke into a smile. "Julie, I knew you would wait for me." The two of them were running neck to neck. "Julie, what Shui Ilan said just now seems to have a hidden meaning." Yunqi clearly did not want to give up on this opportunity. "What mystery?" Shun Julie finally spoke, his face still expressionless. Yunqi said, "He told this girl to work hard." Does this mean that this girl is a spy? After all, the demon realm seems to be showing signs of trouble again. We have to be on guard. Shun Julie glanced at Yunqi lightly. "Have you ever seen anyone instruct their spy in front of others?" Yunqi was speechless. Perhaps this is that guy's trick. He's playing hard to get. He's deliberately doing the opposite. She wouldn't. Shun Julie lowered his head and glanced at Ning Shuima. He was certain of this in his heart. Yunqi was speechless. She couldn't say anything more. If she said anything more, Shun Julie would be disgusted. When Yunqi saw Ning Shuima in Shun Julie's arms, a dark glint flashed across her eyes. She tilted her head and said, "Perhaps I'm thinking too much. Miss Ning wouldn't." "Julie, put Miss Ning on my cloud. This way." Chapter 1202. Shun Julie suddenly asked, "Miss Ning? Do you know her?" Yunqi froze. She had only wanted to prevent Shun Julie from hugging Ning Shuima and had let it slip out of her mouth in a moment of panic. She could only nod. "Yes, Julie. Isn't she your disciple?" Shun Julie asked again, "Is this her original appearance?" Yunqi froze. After a while, she said, "No." Shun Julie glanced at her and continued, "Then how do you know she is my disciple?" Yunqi felt cold sweat trickling down her forehead. She had assumed that it was Ning Shuima because only Ning Shuima could make Shun Julie so nervous. Furthermore, when Shui Ilan had abducted Ning Shuima, they had disguised themselves as an elderly couple. Therefore, she had called her Miss Ning without hesitation. However, she couldn't tell Shun Julie this reason. Shun Julie had finally forgotten Ning Shuima. She couldn't let him recall his feelings for Ning Shuima. She had an idea and pretended not to understand. "Yunqi, I heard that Shui Ilan abducted your disciple Ning Xiuma. Therefore, Julie, the person you rescued, was naturally Miss Ning. Shen Julie glanced at her, but didn't say anything. Yunqi didn't know if he believed her or not. After waiting for a long time, she didn't hear any response from him. He should have believed her, right? She glanced at Ning Xiuma again and felt that the way she nestled in Shun Julie's arms was really annoying. Therefore, she repeated herself. Julie, put Miss Ning on my cloud. Miss Ning is a woman, after all. What Yunqi said made sense. According to the rules of the secular world, men and women shouldn't touch each other. As her master, he really shouldn't be hugging his female disciple. However, he lowered his head and looked at Ning Xiuma in his arms, who seemed to be thinking about something. Was she really just a disciple? Shen Juli carefully looked at Ning Xiuma in his arms. After looking at her for a long time, he was sure she still wanted to hug him. Thus, he said indifferently, no need. Ning Xiuma finally glanced at Yunqi. With one glance, she knew what this woman was thinking. Yunqi was still too young, so her emotions were written all over her face. Ning Xiuma snuggled deeper into the Almighty's embrace. She found a comfortable position and stopped moving. Yunqi, the three of them sped back to the Sun-Moon sect. Shen Juli suddenly asked, Xiuma, where do you live? He called out, Xiuma, so naturally, as if he had called her countless times. That was indeed the case. Ning Xiuma was stunned for a moment before she answered honestly, Tianyin Peak. Shen Juli pondered for a moment, but he didn't say anything. He just carried Ning Xiuma up the Tianyin Peak. Ning Xiuma raised her eyebrows slightly when she saw that Yunqi had followed them shamelessly. She glanced at her and then looked away. The Tianyin Peak was still the same. The only difference was that one had lost her memories, while the other's state of mind had changed. Shen Juli put her down and said indifferently, Go back to your room. Everything seemed to have returned to square one. The Almighty had become cold again. It didn't matter. She could just make him fall in love with her again. Patience was something she didn't lack. Plus, the Almighty wasn't repulsed by her approach, right? This was a good sign. Ning Xiuma nodded. Just as she was about to turn and leave, the Almighty's voice was heard from behind her. Wash your face and come see me again. There was a hint of disdain in his tone. Ning Xiuma. She hadn't turned into an old lady on purpose. Chapter 1203. Ning Xiuma returned to her side chamber. Looking at the familiar yet strange room in front of her, she was slightly stunned. She had left this place for more than 10 years. It had been so long that she had almost forgotten the layout of her room. She was already used to waking up in Shui Ilan's gorgeous Red Devil Palace. Every day, she would face Shui Ilan's deep affection and engage in a tug-of-war with her inner demons every night. Then, she would miss the Almighty endlessly. Those days were not Ning Xiuma's toughest days, but they were her darkest days. In the Devil Palace, her inner demons would disturb her every night, screaming that she had cursed Shun Juli to death. Her determination was shaken, and bit by bit, her inner defenses were broken. Finally, she pulled through. She waited until Shun Juli came to save her, although he had already forgotten about her. But to be able to see him again, to be able to throw herself into his arms again, was a gift from the heavens. She looked around again. The hall was black and white, and the old things that she used to use were all gone. They must have been thrown away by someone. The hall was so cold that there was no sign of life. She clenched her fists. Who was the one who threw her things away? Was it the Almighty? Or Wu Mo? Thinking of the substitute of the Almighty, she felt anger in her heart again. Wu Mo was still alive after killing her. Relying on the fact that the Almighty had lost his memory, he probably did not receive any punishment and was still living well. She stood in front of the dressing table and looked at the old face in the mirror. She was speechless. Shui Ilan, this bastard, always disguised her to be so ugly. Fortunately, the disguise this time was not the kind that was difficult to undo for the first time. Ning Xiuma could easily undo it herself. As she slowly removed the fake skin, her original delicate face was finally revealed. Ning Xiuma looked at herself in the mirror and remained silent. The person in the mirror was still beautiful and elegant, But those lively eyes were now filled with fatigue and vicissitudes of life. She had not slept well for 10 years, moreover. She had become much quieter. Facing the Almighty, she originally had a lot to say, but she could not say a single word. Shui Ilan imprisoned her in the Devil Palace. She did not even have anyone to talk to. The only person she could talk to was Shui Ilan, but Ning Shuima did not want to talk to him. Therefore, she became more and more silent and indifferent. This problem could not be cured in a short period of time, but as long as she was by the Almighty's side, she would slowly recover. When she finished washing herself, her heart, which had been silent for 10 years, finally, her heart, which had been silent for 10 years. Everything had happened too quickly. Before she could react, she had already been taken away by the Almighty to the Tianyin Peak. Now that she had to face Shun Julie, whom she had not seen for 10 years, her nervousness, excitement, joy, and grievance finally came back. They turned into a torrent that rushed into her heart. She could not help but touch her face. She was 14 years old when she left him, but now she was 24 years old. She was born with the appearance of a lowly, and because of her early success in cultivation, her appearance was not much different from 10 years ago. The only difference was that she was taller and had a devilish figure. She wondered how he would react when he saw the real her. He used to like her so much. If he saw her real appearance, even if he had lost his memory, he should still have some impression of her, right? Chapter 1204. Maybe he would remember and regain his memories. 10 years of lovesickness and torment. Now that they were reunited, she really wanted to rush into his arms and tell him all the grievances and longing she had suffered all these years. She wanted to cry in his arms. She wanted him to hug her and comfort her, just like 10 years ago when he had gently stroked her hair and told her, "Shuma, I'm here." Her heart almost flew in her chest, but her feet were rooted to the ground. How was she going to face Shun Julie, who had lost his memories? Her heart was full of bitter longing. Would he not feel anything at all? For the first time, Ning Shuima acted like an ordinary woman. Her imagination ran wild, and she kept denying herself. Finally, she stepped into the main hall. The main hall was very quiet. Ning Shuima could only hear her own footsteps. Each step seemed to step on her heart, causing her soul to tremble continuously. It was a mixture of excitement, nervousness, uneasiness, and joy. Ning Shuima felt that her heart was about to jump out of her chest. She took a deep breath. She was going to see the Almighty soon. Calm down, Ning Shuima. Show your composure as a secret agent boss. Don't act like a shy little girl who doesn't know much about the world, turning around the screen. Ning Shuima felt as if she had been doused with ice water from head to toe. She clenched her hands tightly and tried not to lose her composure. This was normal. This was normal. Shun Julie and Yunshi were sitting opposite each other with a game of chess in front of them. Yunshi looked a little distressed and pouted unconsciously. "Julie, can't you just let me have a handicap? Just one." Shun Julie tapped his fingers on the chessboard. "Yunshi, don't regret your moves." The Almighty and Yunshi were friends. Wasn't it normal for them to play chess together? However, this feeling was really terrible. The Almighty had asked her to find him after bathing. She had been longing to have a long talk with the Almighty after a long separation. She had been extremely nervous about it. However, the Almighty obviously didn't take her seriously. He didn't plan to meet her alone. Plus, he got along very well with Yunshi. This made her previous nervousness, agitation, and uneasiness seem laughable. She pursed her lips and suppressed the churning emotions in her heart. "Almighty, I'm here." Shun Julie casually glanced at her and said indifferently, "Pour the tea." Ning Shuima. She lowered her eyes to look at the dress she was wearing and then at her hands. She hadn't dressed up properly for 10 years, but after she came back this time, she dressed up meticulously. Her hair was combed into a complicated and beautiful flowing cloud bun. Because the closet was empty, she couldn't find any clothes that she could wear. So, she used a transformation technique to transform the old clothes she was wearing into a long, fluttering dress. She tried her best to make herself beautiful, so that even if he was not stunned by her beauty, he would at least take a few more glances at her. He did not expect that. He only glanced at her once. It was still an extremely indifferent glance, no different from looking at a piece of furniture in the house. He didn't have any intention of being stunned and naturally ordered her to do things. Ning Xiuma suppressed the disappointment in her heart and walked forward. She picked up the teapot and silently poured a cup of tea for Shunjuli. Just as she was about to put the teapot back, she heard his voice again. In the same indifferent tone, he said, "Do you still need me to teach you how to pour tea for Yunshi?" Pour tea for Yunshi? Ning Xiuma's body stiffened. She tightened her grip on the teapot. Chapter 1205. After a while, she heard herself say, "Yes, master." Her voice was monotonous. Yunshi looked at her with a smug expression. Shunjuli glanced at Ning Xiuma. He seemed a little puzzled as to why she had suddenly changed the way she addressed him. However, he didn't say anything and continued playing chess. Ning Xiuma lowered her gaze and poured a cup of tea for Yunshi. She suddenly recalled the time when she had played chess with Yunshi and he had poured a cup of viburnum spring tea for her. The fragrance had filled the air. Through the spiraling fragrance of the tea, she had seen Shun Juli's gentle face. While she had been distracted, she had poured too much water into the teapot and it had overflowed a little. The water had splashed onto Yunshi's yellow dress. Yunshi gasped softly and looked at Shun Juli with an aggrieved expression. "Julie, this is my favorite dress." Ning Xiuma looked at her coldly without saying anything. Shun Juli frowned slightly and looked at Ning Xiuma with a scrutinizing gaze. "What's wrong with you? Can't you do something like this properly?" He had actually reprimanded her because of Yunshi. She had already been treated like a servant and poured tea for Yunshi. She hadn't expected to be reprimanded because of Yunshi. Ning Xiuma's heart ached. Then a nameless flame burst out. She put down the teapot in her hand and smashed it on the chessboard with a loud bang. She had used so much force that more than half of the hot tea had spilled out. The hot water had instantly scalded her hands, but she didn't seem to feel anything. Instead, she flashed a fake smile at the two people sitting opposite her. "Sorry, I really didn't do this. The two of you can do it yourselves. Goodbye." With that, she turned around and left. Yunshi was dumbfounded. She glanced at Ning Xiuma and then at Shun Juli and said in surprise, "Julie." Shun Juli was speechless. While Ning Xiuma was walking forward, she suddenly felt a strong force pulling her collar. She didn't have time to react as her body was continuously pushed back until she was standing in front of the chessboard. Only then did the force on her collar disappear. Ning Xiuma coughed nonstop as soon as she landed on the ground. She coughed for a while before she stopped. She looked up angrily and saw Shun Juli looking at her coldly. Shun Juli's face was as calm as still water, and his voice carried a trace of coldness. "Apologize." Apologize? Was he going to apologize to Yunshi? Never. Ning Xiuma glared at him angrily. She pursed her lips tightly and refused to say a word. Shun Juli waited for a while, but she did not apologize. He moved his hand, and Ning Xiuma retreated a few steps in the air. Then, her body suddenly stiffened, and she was fixed in place. Shun Juli's voice carried a trace of coldness. "I will let you go when you apologize." After he said this, he ignored her and started to play chess with Yunshi again. Ning Xiuma looked up and saw his indifferent face and Yunshi's slightly raised lips. "Very good." Ning Xiuma stood there silently. She did not say a word, as if her mute acupoint had been sealed. The way she was fixed in place was a little strange. It happened to be the way she walked. One of her hands was raised, and the other was lowered. One of her legs was slightly raised, and the other was slightly bent. After standing for a while, Ning Xiuma felt her arms and legs aching. Gradually, cold sweat started to form on her forehead. Her telekinesis had not recovered, so she was just an ordinary person now. The time it takes for an incense stick to burn passed. Her body swayed slightly as she lifted her head to look at Shun Juli. He was still focused on playing chess. Out of nowhere, a jade teapot had appeared. At the moment, he was pouring tea for himself and filling a cup for Yunshi. Chapter 1206. The sky blue cup was translucent, and a dark green flower was slowly blooming in the dark green tea. Upon closer inspection, the flower wasn't a real flower. It was made up of countless petals and leaves that formed a beautiful flower. Steam rose in spirals from the tea, and the fragrance of the tea was cool and fragrant. Yunchi looked at Shun Julie with sparkling eyes and took a sip of the tea. She smiled and said, "Julie, is this viburnum spring?" Then she looked at Ning Shuama with a mysterious smile and said, "It is indeed a good tea." Shun Julie said indifferently, "As long as you like it." Viburnum spring, back then, she had been playing against Yunchi. The Almighty had poured a cup of fragrant viburnum spring for her. Through the steam of the tea, she had seen Yunchi's pale face. Now the tables had turned. She had been fixed there. Shun Julie had poured tea for Yunchi, and Yunchi had smiled proudly as she held the tea. If she hadn't been nailed there, she would have applauded this scene. Ning Shuama's heart felt heavy, as if a huge rock was pressing down on it. She closed her eyes slightly and waited for the pain in her heart to pass. Shun Julie raised his head and looked at Ning Shuama. When he saw her pale face, he paused for a moment, but it was only for a moment. Before Yunchi could react, he lowered his head and calmly placed another piece. 2 hours passed, 4 hours had passed. She heard the crisp sound of pieces being placed, and in front of her was a beautiful scene of a pair of immortal lovers. She felt like a clown, frozen in a ridiculous position and unable to move. It was a strong contrast to the harmonious and beautiful scene between the two of them. Ning Shuama's whole body was in pain, but she still pursed her lips and didn't say a word. She would never apologize. Yunchi and Shun Julie had already played a few rounds, so time passed quickly. She looked up at Shun Julie and saw that he was still indifferent, but the speed at which he played chess was not as fast as before, and the time he spent in a trance was getting longer and longer. He seemed a little absent-minded. After finishing the game, Shun Julie said indifferently, "All right, let's stop here." He glanced at Ning Shuama again. Seeing that she was still silent and had no intention of apologizing, he paused for a moment and turned to leave. Yunchi was stunned for a moment before she chased after him. At this time, it was already evening. Ning Shuama thought that the sky outside must be filled with rosy clouds. The scenery of Tianyin Peak was still the same, just like that day when Shun Julie patted her head and said to her, "Shuama, wait for me to come back." He didn't expect that he would wait for 10 years. What's more, he didn't expect that after waiting for 10 years, he would end up in this situation. Ning Shuama felt blood surging in her internal organs. She tried her best to suppress her emotions and analyze the situation rationally. She was in the wrong just now. She was too agitated. After all, the Almighty had lost his memory and was only treating her as an ordinary disciple. Wasn't it normal for a disciple to pour tea for a guest? Wasn't it normal to punish a disobedient disciple? Calm down, calm down. A child's voice faintly sounded in her heart. Don't you feel wronged? Don't you feel sad? He reprimanded and punished you for another woman. He used to love you so much. Ning Shuama closed her eyes and tried her best to suppress the pain in her heart. She retorted in her mind, "He has forgotten about me. He now treats me as his disciple. It's normal to reprimand a disciple." Chapter 12:07. That child's voice chuckled. "Momo, are you trying to convince me or convince yourself? Is forgetting a reason? Do you think forgetting in the name of forgetting allows one to wantonly hurt you and be forgiven? Momo, do you really think so? Listen, your heart is crying, crying so loudly. Can't you hear it?" Ning Shuama took a deep breath, suppressing her churning emotions, and coldly said, "Get lost." That child's voice laughed like a little angel. "Momo, do you still remember how Shun Julie treated you tenderly at Luoying Cliff 10 years ago? He kissed you tenderly and told you to wait for him to come back. And now? You waited for 10 years, but what did you get?" Ning Shuama's hands trembled slightly. Her heart seemed to be tightly gripped by a big hand, and even breathing was somewhat difficult. That voice was full of temptation and innocence. "Momo, this mortal world is too tiring. This emotion is too tiring. Give up. Let me help you, okay? Become a demon. It won't be so tiring if you become a demon. Ning Shuama closed her eyes, feeling exhaustion crawling all over her body. Not only her body, but also her heart. She was really tired. Would becoming a demon really not be tiring anymore? This thought flashed through Ning Shuama's mind. She was suddenly startled and abruptly slapped this thought out of her mind. No way. She absolutely couldn't become a demon. A soft sigh sounded in her ears. That child's voice seemed to have a trace of pity. Momo, why do you have to be like this? Who are you persevering for? Was it because of Shunjuli? You're really stupid. Ning Shuma tried hard not to listen to her words, but that voice sounded like a demon again. Momo, let's make a bet, okay? Let's bet on when Shunjuli will unseal your acupoints. Ning Shuama coldly said, I won't bet. Whether I win or lose, it won't do me any good. That voice chuckled, with a trace of temptation in her voice. Momo, if I lose, I'll be silent from now on, and if you lose, you'll become a demon. Is that fair? Ning Shuama said sarcastically. I refuse. I don't believe that you will fulfill the bet. Why should I bet with you? There was a hint of joy in the child's voice, as if he was happy that he knew a secret. Momo, this is not the real reason. You and I both know. The real reason is that you're not sure whether Shinjuli will come or not, right? Momo, you're already disappointed in him, aren't you? Ning Shuma felt a sharp pain in her heart, as if someone was gripping her heart tightly. She said coldly, Shut up. The child's voice laughed even more merrily, laughing unscrupulously. Momo, I was right, wasn't I? I am you, and you are me. If you really didn't have these thoughts, how would I know? Momo, I know your heart better than you do, and I'm also more honest than you. Ning Shuama took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. With a frosty face, she said word by word, I said, shut up. If you say one more word, I'll destroy my dantian and die with you. The child's voice laughed a few times and finally stopped talking. Ning Shuma opened her eyes and quietly looked at the sky outside, which was darkening little by little. The moon rose little by little, hanging high in the starry sky. The moonlight slowly flowed down on Ning Shuama's body like water. The night was getting darker, and the cold air was getting heavier. Her clothes seemed to be stained with water vapor, which made her skin feel cold. It was as if she was covered with a layer of frost. Her face was pale, her lips were slightly blue, and her eyes were dark, without any emotion. Chapter 12:08. Ning Shuama's body was already numb. She couldn't feel anything. She kept looking at the door. There was no one outside, only the stars and the moon. She looked at the stars and the bright moon. Standing there, she seemed to be admiring the night scenery. Like a cold and hard stone statue, he stood there motionlessly, his gaze fixed on the door. After some time, the night was like a thin veil that was peeling off layer by layer. The sky gradually turned white, and then it became bigger and bigger. The sky lit up bit by bit. Ning Shuma suddenly felt her acupuncture points warm up, and then she fell to the ground. She tried to stand up, but found that her legs were already numb, and she couldn't use any strength. She lay on the ground, pursed her lips, and rubbed her calves with her hands. At first, she didn't feel anything, but after rubbing for a long time, she felt a trace of warmth on her calves. Then, she felt pain and numbness, as if countless ants were biting her calves. She stood up with difficulty and staggered back to her room. There was no emotion in her eyes. All her emotions seemed to have been frozen in the lonely cold night last night. She covered herself with a blanket and quietly looked at the sky outside the window. She couldn't sleep at all. Her emotions were in a mess. Ning Shuama didn't know what she was thinking. That eccentric Lolita kept chattering in her mind again. She couldn't go on like this. Ning Shuama straightforwardly hit her own sleeping acupoint. Finally, it's quiet. Ning Shuama thought in a daze before she fell asleep. When she woke up, it was already evening. The setting sun only left a few strands of colorful clouds in the sky, and it was about to fall into the valley. She actually slept for a whole day without a single dream. Her whole body was sore. This was the after effect of standing for a whole night. Ning Shuima hugged the blanket and sat for a long time before she finally got up. She wanted to go out for a walk. She couldn't stay here all day. She looked down at her body. She was still wearing the old woman's clothes that Shui Yilan had prepared for her. She sniffed her body and felt that it was going to rot. She looked around the room. It was cold and cheerless. She was the only one there. The furnishings in the room didn't change at all. Obviously, no one came to visit her after she slept in her room for the whole day. Shun Julie didn't come either. You probably forgot about her again, right? Even if she slept like a log in the room, he probably wouldn't notice. Ning Shuima shook her head abruptly, as if the bitterness in her heart was about to rise again. Stop. When did he become so sensitive? She didn't want to act like a resentful woman here, wallowing in self-pity. She quickly finished washing up and walked out of the door, walking aimlessly. When she came back to her senses, she was already at the entrance of the main hall. She looked at the door of the main hall, and her lips curled up slightly. Logically speaking, as his disciple, she should go in and greet him. She might even have to kneel down. Logically speaking, when he had lost his memory, she should have tolerated it if she wanted to redeem him. However, there were too many negative emotions in her heart. What if Shenjuli was playing chess with Yunqi again? Wouldn't she be ordered around again? She felt uncomfortable all over. If she broke a pot or a cup, she was afraid that she would be fixed for the whole night again. The gains wouldn't make up for the losses. She should go down the mountain for a walk. Firstly, she needed to calm her emotions. Secondly, she needed to train her communication skills. She felt like she couldn't speak anymore. Chapter 1209. She was so bored that even she herself found it boring. Furthermore, she had to prepare some clothes and daily necessities for herself. The great god didn't care about her now, so she had to rely on herself to have enough food and clothing. Ning Shuima thought for a moment, then turned and strode away. She arrived at the barrier. Not bad. Although the barrier set by Shun Julie wasn't the same as the previous one, it was still one that she had learned before, so she easily broke through it. She passed through the barrier and descended the Heavenly Note Peak. Following the small path, she walked around aimlessly. This place hadn't changed. It was still the same as before. Ning Shuima was like a person who had been wandering for a long time, returning to her hometown. She carefully observed the surrounding scenery. Dusk gradually enveloped them. Along the way, she naturally met a few disciples of the Sun Moon sect. Those who recognized her naturally ran over to greet her. Those who didn't also followed the others to greet her. Everything seemed to be the same as 10 years ago. Ning Shuima felt a little uncomfortable. She thought that the disciples who knew her would be surprised to see her return. She didn't expect this. Perhaps Shinjuli had already informed the Sun Moon sect of her return. That's why they were so calm. A young disciple with delicate features suddenly ran over from afar. His face was like a little bun. He looked up and smiled at her softly. Then, he stuffed a blue voice transmission talisman into her hand. Then, he quickly ran away. Ning Shuima looked at the voice transmission talisman in her hand. For a moment, she didn't react. The blue voice transmission talisman lit up slightly. A clear male voice came from it. Shuima. It was Yelu Jing, and hearing the voice of an old friend, Ning Shuima was momentarily dazed. She didn't know what to feel. After a moment of silence, she replied, "It's me." Her voice was slightly cold. After she said this, she felt a little vexed. Yelu Jing and had always treated her well. She shouldn't have been so cold. She had really been locked up by Shui Yilan. She almost didn't know how to communicate anymore. Fortunately, Yelu Jing and didn't seem to mind. Shuima, come to the leisurely cloud pavilion. The light from the sound transmitting talisman disappeared. Ning Shuima stored it in her sleeve, feeling a little disappointed. She had been missing for 10 years, and her return seemed to be a little dull. Forget it. She could even accept the Almighty's indifference, so why should she care about other people's attitudes? After all, she wasn't very friendly to others right now. Ning Shuima was not someone who was particularly calculative. After a moment of hesitation, she let go and walked towards the leisurely cloud pavilion. Perhaps Yelu Jing and had something to ask, and it just so happened that she also had something to ask him. After walking through a few corridors, the leisurely cloud pavilion came into view. Just as he was about to step in, he suddenly heard a bang, and a beam of light shot up into the sky. Ning Xiumo reflexively looked up at the sky and saw a beautiful firework exploding in the sky. It was gorgeous and beautiful. Following that, fireworks shot up into the sky from all directions and exploded one after another. In the blink of an eye, the entire sky had been covered. The dazzling fireworks painted the deep blue sky with golden and silver lines. Finally, an even bigger firework shot up into the sky. When it slowly bloomed in the sky, a line of words appeared in the sky. Xiuema, welcome home. Ning Xiuema, she suddenly turned around and saw Yalu Jing, Anne's gentle smile in the night wind. Xiuema, welcome home. Behind him, the other senior brothers also turned around and smiled at her. Xiuema, you're finally back. Chapter 12:10. Ning Xiuema looked at them one by one. 8th senior brother, 9th senior brother, 12th senior brother. She suddenly felt warm in her heart. She didn't know why, but her eyes were a little moist. That faint sense of loss had already disappeared. Someone suddenly rushed out from the pavilion and made a beautiful turn in the air. He landed in front of Ning Xiuema and smiled like a flower. Xiuema, Martial Uncle, you're finally back. You don't know how sad I was when I heard the news of your death. It was Helian Xiao. He opened his arms and planned to give Ning Xiuema a big hug. Yalu Jing and glanced at Helian Xiao indifferently. Her eyes contained a warning intent. Helian Xiao's arms froze in midair. He laughed dryly and retracted his arms. He patted 12th Martial Uncle, who was closest to Ning Xiuema, and said, Martial Uncle, Xiuema is finally back. She's clearly alive and well, but you guys came back to report that she was dead. I was so sad for a long time. 12th Martial Uncle rubbed his arms and glared at Helian Xiao. He looked at Ning Xiuema and sighed. Xiuema, when you were kidnapped by the great demon back then, we were so anxious. All the spies of the Sun Moon sect were sent out to search for your whereabouts. After searching for half a month, we found a corpse in a valley. The corpse was covered in blood and was wearing your clothes. It was exactly the same as your figure. The blood was also yours. We thought it was you. Shui Yilan indeed made a fake corpse to fool the people of the Sun Moon sect. Ning Xiuema had already guessed it. Now that she finally got confirmation, she nodded. Helian Xiao couldn't help but interrupt. Martial Uncle Xiuema, how did you get kidnapped by the great demon back then? How did you survive all these years? Where did he hide you? Ning Xiuema's eyes deepened as she looked at the people around her. Naturally, she couldn't mention that she was hurt by Wu Mo in such an occasion. All right, let's not talk here. Xiuema just came back. Let's welcome her first, Yalu Jing and said. Let's go, Xiuema, let's talk inside. A group of people clustered around Ning Xiuema as they walked towards a large hall not far away. Ning Xiuema felt a sudden warmth in her heart when she arrived at the main hall. It was as if a warm current had washed over her. 2 rows of people stood in the main hall, obviously to welcome her. She looked at them one by one. Among these people, she knew some of them and some of them she didn't. However, all of them had a sincere smile on their faces as they looked at her and said in unison, Xiuema, welcome back. An old master rushed in front of her. He was so happy that his face bloomed like a chrysanthemum. Master, you're finally back. Master? Ning Xiuema was so shocked that she took a step back. She looked at the old man in front of her and finally recognized him. He was the old master who tested her on recitation. The pavilion was already prepared with good food and wine. A large group of people sat down, and it was very lively. Yalu Jing and took the lead and raised his wine cup. His smile was as gentle as water. Xiuema, let me toast you. Welcome back. Ning Xiuema also raised her wine cup and drank it in one gulp. People she knew and didn't know kept toasting her. She didn't refuse anyone and accepted all the toasts. Helian Xiao didn't stop talking since the banquet started. He kept talking beside Ning Xiuema for half a day. If Ning Xiuema asked one question, he could answer 8 questions. With him by her side, Ning Xiuema also gradually relaxed. She drank and played games with everyone. Dear friends, From tomorrow onwards, there will be an explosive update for a few days. The real explosive update will be more than 100,000 words. Let everyone enjoy it. Everyone, please vote for me. Chapter 12:11. Fireworks bloomed continuously in the sky, each beautiful. Looking out the window, one could see that the fireworks took a lot of effort to create. Helian Xiao even controlled the wind to form a row of words in the sky. Marshal Uncle Xiuma, welcome home. Yalu Jing and couldn't help but laugh. Xiuma, these fireworks were created by this fellow. Ever since he knew that you were back, he has been creating them without rest. Ning Xiuma looked at the row of words in the sky and suddenly felt her heart grow warmer and warmer. Her mood also improved a lot, and most of the gloominess from before was washed away. Home. Yes, she had already treated the Sun-Moon sect as her home. Now that she was back, she was indeed going home. The atmosphere of the banquet was very lively, and the climax was endless. Everyone was singing and laughing. The large group of people gradually celebrated until midnight before gradually dispersing. Helian Xiao walked beside Ning Xiuma and suddenly patted Ning Xiuma's shoulder. Marshal Uncle Xiuma, let's go. We haven't seen each other for 10 years. Let's find a place to continue drinking. Let's not go home until we're drunk. He drank a lot during the banquet, but he wasn't drunk yet. Ning Xiuma was a little tipsy. She hugged Helian Xiao's shoulder like a brother. Then we'll definitely drink you until you're on the ground. Let's go. Helian, let's not go home until we're drunk. On the roof of a large hall, the stars were shining brightly, and the moon was bright. Ning Xiuma and Helian Xiao each hugged a wine jar and were drinking with each other. The two of them drank one jar, and they drank as if they were drinking water. In the blink of an eye, they drank 7 to 8 jars. Xiuma, it's great that you're back. You don't know that after you left, the entire Sun-Moon sect went crazy looking for you. In these 10 years, they didn't really stop looking for you, especially Little Apple. After you got into trouble, it ran away and has been frantically looking for you outside. All right, did you meet Little Apple? Helian Xiao hugged a wine jar and asked. He was already 80 to 90% drunk, and he was stuttering when he spoke. Ning Xiuma drank a lot tonight. She, who wouldn't get drunk even after 1,000 cups, was already a little muddle-headed. She was already seeing double when she looked at Helian Xiao. She only heard half of what Helian Xiao said, and her brain was also in a half-shut state. She smiled drunkenly and asked, Little Apple? Who was Little Apple? Why did you come up with such a fun name? Helian Xiao touched her head and said exaggeratedly, You don't have a fever. Little Apple is your family's Kirin. Have you forgotten? Kirin? Hearing this, Ning Xiuma finally came to her senses. She slapped his hand away and asked, Little Apple went out to look for me? It hasn't come back yet? Helian Xiao nodded and said loudly, Of course. Back then, after you were injured and went missing, Little Apple ran out to look for you like a madman. After that, it also went missing. In the past 10 years, there hasn't been a single trace of it. That's why everyone thought it was you when they found that corpse. If Little Apple had always been in the Sun-Moon sect, as long as it was in good condition, your lives would be connected and everyone would be more at ease. Why? You haven't met it all this time. Then where could it have gone? Ning Xiuma's mind exploded. She hurriedly tried to sense Little Apple in her heart, but she couldn't sense it at all. Under Shui Ilan's control, it wasn't strange that she couldn't sense Kirin. Now that it had come out, why couldn't she sense it? Could it be that Little Apple had also been killed by Shui Ilan? This was Ning Xiuma's first reaction. The wine jug in her bosom slipped and fell to the ground. With a gurgling sound, it fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Chapter 12:12. Ning Xiuma was stunned for a while before she realized that her 10-year contract with Little Apple had expired. She couldn't sense Little Apple anymore. Realizing this, Ning Xiuma's mood fell again. However, she was slightly relieved. Maybe it was just that she couldn't contact Little Apple because the 10-year contract had expired, but it didn't mean that Little Apple had met with misfortune. Kirin was quite clever. Other than Shui Lan, there probably wouldn't be anyone who would really kill this kind of divine beast. Little Apple should be fine. Maybe it was lost somewhere else like how it was lost in the stone spirit's stomach. That must be it. No, she had to look for it. That child was so ignorant. Once it was lost somewhere, it wouldn't even have the ability to escape by itself. Maybe it was living an extremely torturous life now, and maybe it was waiting for her to save it. Kieran's figure seemed to appear in front of her eyes. She felt as if a ball of fire was ignited in her chest. She suddenly stood up. No, I have to look for it. Before she could finish her sentence, her body suddenly swayed, and she sat down with a plop, almost rolling down from the roof. Fortunately, Hellion Xiao was quick to react and caught her. Be careful. Ning Xiuma was very dizzy. She shook her head and wanted to stand up again. Hellion Xiao held her down with difficulty. If you want to look for it, there's no hurry. You drank too much. Sober up first. I'm not drunk. Ning Xiuma was like an ordinary person who drank too much. When she was completely drunk, she refused to admit it. I can still drink a few more jars. She was completely drunk now, and her tongue was twice as big. In order to prove her words, she picked up another wine jar from the side and broke the mud seal. This time, she used more strength. Not only did she break the mud seal, but she also cut off half of the jar's mouth. The wine flowed down and splashed on Hellion Xiao's face. Hellion Xiao. He raised his hand and wiped his face. He also drank too much and had been trying to stay sober. At this moment, he couldn't help but burst into laughter. Xiuma, you're still saying that you're not drunk. You can't even slap the mud seal properly. Ning Xiuma raised her head and laughed heartily. I did it on purpose. Ha! It's easier to drink like this. In order to prove that drinking like this was really satisfying, she picked it up and brought it close to the edge of the jar to drink. She swayed so much that she almost couldn't find her mouth. Half of the remaining half of the jar went into her stomach, and the other half went down her collar, soaking a large part of the front of her clothes. After she finished drinking, she threw the half of the wine jug down coolly. She used too much force and almost threw herself down as well. Hellion Xiao hurriedly grabbed onto her. In his drunken haze, he originally wanted to pull her arm, but when he stretched out his hand, it went astray and directly grabbed onto Ning Xiuma's collar. Ning Xiuma still had her instincts. She subconsciously pulled at her collar. Let go. Hellion Xiao's reaction was also close to sluggish. Not only did he not let go of her pull, his body swayed, and he directly laid on top of her. Both of them almost rolled down together. Hellion Xiao was, after all, slightly lighter than Ning Xiuma. He hurriedly stretched out his arms and legs to stabilize his body on the roof. Then, he realized that he was still lying on top of her. Below him was a soft and fragrant body. It was the beauty that he once secretly longed for. He was drunk and looked at Ning Xiuma below him, forgetting to get up for a moment. Chapter 12:13. Ning Xiuma almost spat out the wine she had drunk from being pressed down by him. Her face flushed red. Fortunately, she still had her instincts. She raised her hand and suddenly exerted force. Hellion Xiao was caught off guard and flipped off her body. Hellion Xiao rolled on the spot and finally stabilized his body. At this moment, he was lying on his stomach. He vaguely felt that the sky was covered by darkness. His drunken eyes saw a white-clothed person in front of him. He opened his eyes wide and tried to identify the person. When he saw the person clearly, he almost slipped and fell. Dizun. It was actually Dizun. In an instant, cold sweat covered his body. He was mostly sober. He jumped up and pulled the similarly drunk Ning Xiuma up at the same time. He whispered in her ear, "Wake up, Xiuma. Dizun is here." Ning Xiuma's head was spinning at this moment. Seeing the person in front of her, she saw double again. She felt that someone was swaying in front of her. She frowned and muttered, "Stop swaying. You're making me dizzy." Her legs went soft, and she almost fell down again. Hellion Xiao hurriedly wanted to pull her up, but he felt a force stopping him. Just as he was about to throw caution to the wind, he felt an ice-cold gaze sweep past him. All the hair on his body stood on end. With this delay, Ning Xiuma fell hard on the roof. She frowned in pain and complained. Helian, why didn't you pull me up? Helian, Xiao couldn't say anything. He stood there with a red face. He wanted to pull her up, but Dizun wouldn't let him. Ning Xuema wanted to get up by herself, but suddenly a force lifted her up and made her stand firm. At the same time, a cold voice sounded in her ear. Did you wake up from the fall? If you don't, you'll fall again. Ning Xuema quickly straightened her body to show that she was awake. She tried to open her eyes and barely saw who was in front of her. She picked up the wine jar again and smiled foolishly at Shun Julie as if she was presenting a treasure. Master, you're here. Do you want to drink a jar? Shun Julie, Helian Xiao was speechless. Shun Julie waved his hand, and the wine jug in Ning Xuema's hand suddenly fell to the ground, shattering into pieces and splashing wine everywhere. Helian Xiao felt that his heart had also been ruthlessly smashed onto the ground along with the wine jug, smashing into smithereens. He felt that his fate would probably be the same as that wine jar. He wanted to turn around and run away, but he was worried that Ning Xuema would be punished. Therefore, although he was scared, in the end, he still stood there with a lot of backbone. Grandmaster, it's my fault. I dragged Marshal Uncle Xuema here to drink. If you want to punish me, before he could finish his words, Shun Julie's cold stare killed his words in his stomach, and he couldn't continue. Ning Xuema was a little sober. She shook her head and tried to focus her eyes in one direction. Master. Shun Julie's tone couldn't hide his anger. You still know to call me master? You didn't pay your respects or practice martial arts today, and instead ran down here to drink in violation of his sex rules. You fooled around until midnight and didn't go back. Fooled around until midnight and didn't go back? Why did this sentence sound so funny? She felt that Shun Julie's tone at this moment was like a resentful wife complaining about her husband coming home late. Ning Xuema giggled a few times, but she felt that something wasn't right and suppressed it again. However, she was now a slow-witted person and couldn't completely control her own emotions. Therefore, she couldn't suppress it and laughed again regardless of the occasion. She laughed until Shun Julie's expression became more and more unsightly. Helian Xiao wished he could cover her mouth. Chapter 12:14. How could this girl be so bold after drinking? She actually dared to laugh at the ancestor. At the same time, he was puzzled. The ancestor had never cared about them drinking before. Why did he suddenly get angry this time? But even if Helian Xiao had 10 times the courage, he wouldn't dare to ask the ancestor this question. Thus, he lowered his head and tried his best to reduce his presence. Moreover, he was worried about the obviously drunk Ning Xuema, but he didn't expect the ancestor's anger to immediately spread to him. Helian Xiao only felt an ice-cold gaze fall on him. Helian Xiao felt that his hair was about to stand up and dance. His whole body was unbearably cold, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. Immediately after, he heard the ancestor's voice, which was as cold as the winter snow, say, offending your superiors and drinking together. Go to the cliff of reflection and reflect for a year. A year. Helian Xiao's entire face fell, but he could only say, yes. With a bitter face, he went to the cliff of reflection to reflect. At this time, Ning Xuema had already stopped laughing, but she was too drunk. She only heard half of the conversation between Helian Xiao and Shun Julie. She tilted her head and looked at Shun Julie, puzzled, and asked, what cliff of reflection? There's actually a cliff of reflection in the Sun Moon sect? How come I don't know about it? Shun Julie picked her up and flew with the wind. At the same time, he said coldly in Ning Xuema's ear, when you wake up, I'll throw you in there and understand you well. Ning Xuema hugged his waist and said dizzily, then it's better not to understand. Master, fly slower. I'm cold. She was actually still being picky. Shun Julie resisted the urge to throw her down. His speed suddenly doubled, like a shooting star streaking across the night sky. Ning Xuema hugged his waist tightly and muttered, Master, are you sitting on a rocket? What's the rush? She opened her hazy eyes and looked at Shun Julie, asking curiously, Master, why do you have 2 heads? TSK, TSK, the great God is indeed the great God. You actually have one more head than ordinary people. Shunjuli, it was one thing for this troublesome disciple of his to not greet him for a whole day, but she actually ran down to drink with a group of people without his permission. She was punished to stand for an entire night, so she was probably feeling very unhappy. It was not impossible for her to ask her senior marshal brothers and junior marshal nephews to help her out. If you want to drink, then drink. Therefore, when he noticed that she had run down the mountain to meet with those people, he did not take it to heart. He thought that she would come back when she was almost done drinking. After all, Yalu Jing was a steady person. With him here, Ning Xuema wouldn't do anything out of line. Therefore, Shunjuli did not pay attention to this matter for the entire day. However, he was still worried about her. Even when he was cultivating, he would always pay attention to her return. However, he didn't expect that even after waiting until midnight, the lass still hadn't returned. Only then did he come out, and from afar he saw the two drunk people rolling together on the roof. At that moment, he felt a burst of anger in his heart. He had the urge to kick Helian Shao out of the Milky Way. Fortunately, he had always been extremely calm and rational. He quickly saw that these two people were so clumsy because they drank too much. Moreover, when he fell down, Helian Shao had already been pushed away. He endured again and again, and only then did he stop himself from kicking Helian Shao down. This disgraceful ass, drinking with a man, and getting so drunk as if she was a puddle of mud. Wasn't she afraid of being taken advantage of? Not only did she not have the slightest trace of remorse, she even threw a drunken tantrum at him. Chapter 12:15. I must teach her a good lesson and make her remember it for the rest of her life. Shunjili flew back to Tianyin Peak and went straight to Yinshui Lake. He was now hanging over Yinshui Lake, his white robe fluttering in the night wind. Looking at Ning Xuema, who was drunk to the point of unconsciousness and full of nonsense, his eyes flashed with a trace of hesitation. Ning Xuema hugged Shunjuli's arm and tried to open her eyes wide, saying, "Master, don't shake me. You're making me dizzy. Did you use Naruto's shadow clone jutsu? Hee, I think you actually saw 4. Very good. It was obvious that he was dead drunk." Shunjuli's eyes were cold, and his hand loosened. Ning Xuan only felt her body suddenly sink, and before she could react, she fell into the lake with a plop. The bone-chilling cold lake water instantly swept from all directions, drowning her mouth and nose being stimulated by the cold water. Ning Xuema finally sobered up quite a bit. She shivered as she was surrounded by pitch-black lake water. The scene of her being drowned alive by Yi Qingluan seemed to be playing out once again. Fear swept over her like a tide. She desperately wanted to swim up, but her brain was paralyzed by alcohol, and her limbs didn't seem to belong to her. She was so anxious that she choked on a mouthful of water. The feeling of suffocation came, and her brain was in a daze. "I'm going to drown again." This realization made her extremely frightened. She struggled desperately, but she couldn't break free from the lake water that was coming from all directions. She wanted to ask for help, but she choked on a mouthful of water as soon as she opened her mouth. She finally shouted while floating, "Help! Cough, cough, help, cough, cough, cough." Shunjuli floated in the air, looking at Ning Xuema, who was struggling below with his arms crossed, and a flash of surprise flashed through his heart. Didn't she know how to swim? Why was she struggling like this? Hey, why was he so sure that she knew how to swim? He just saw her. When Ning Xuema shouted for help, he finally couldn't help but rush down and raise his hand to pick her up. Only then did he realize that her face was pale and her eyes were rolled up. She had already fainted. His heart sank, and some kind of emotion floated up and down in his chest. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by someone. Without thinking, he hurriedly used his internal energy to help her force out the water that she had choked on. Fortunately, she didn't drink too much water. Ning Xuema finally woke up after spitting out a few mouthfuls of water. She even spat out a lot of wine, so her mind was much clearer. When she woke up, she saw Shunjuli looking down at her. She was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She raised her hand and slapped him. Shun Julie tilted his head to avoid it. His face darkened. Just as he was about to throw her down again, he suddenly heard her angry voice. "Shun Julie, you bastard. You said you would never drown me again. You want me to believe you, but you threw me down with your own hands today." Shun Julie froze. He met her angry eyes. "Did I say that?" Ning Xiaomo was stunned. Then, she suddenly burst into laughter. "Yes, how could I forget? You've already forgotten me. You've already forgotten me. How could you still remember what you said in the past? Ha ha ha, you forgot. You forgot everything." She laughed until her whole body was trembling. Tears glistened in her eyes. Shun Julie felt as if someone was ruthlessly squeezing his heart. It hurt terribly. He pursed his lips. How could he forget only her? He had forgotten everyone else. If Yunqi hadn't reminded him, he wouldn't even remember the Sun Moon sect. Everything was slowly becoming familiar. Chapter 12:16. Because of his amnesia, he didn't want to get too close to anyone. When he came back this time, the other people in the Sun Moon sect didn't notice anything strange about him. But this little disciple, wasn't she very close to him in the past? He had forgotten about her. In her eyes, it was as if he was evil beyond redemption. Her attitude towards him was also a bit strange. It wasn't like how a disciple would treat her master. How could he have allowed her to be so close to him in the past? He quietly looked at her and found that he couldn't bear to see her in a mess. He casually tidied up her wet hair and her messy clothes. Ning Xiaomo fiercely slapped his hand away and screamed, "Don't touch me, you liar!" Then, as if she didn't have any more strength, her hand fell down powerlessly. Her eyes slowly closed. Shun Julie was stunned. He checked her breathing. It was still very stable. She seemed to have fallen asleep. He didn't think that she could fall asleep immediately after throwing a tantrum. He carried her and floated in the sky for a long time. In the end, he silently sent her back to the side hall. He put her on the bed. When he was about to leave, she suddenly hugged his arm. Turning around, he saw that she was hugging him unconsciously. Her eyes were still closed, and her mouth seemed to be mumbling something. Shun Julie quietly listened. "So cold. Great God, I'm so cold." Shun Julie then realized that her entire body was still wet. His eyebrows slightly furrowed. With a flash of white light, Ning Xiaomo's clothes became dry. He turned around and wanted to pull his arm away, but he saw that Ning Xiaomo suddenly burst into tears. She cried like an abandoned child, sobbing, "How could you forget me? How could you do this?" Shun Julie quietly looked at her. Seeing her tears, he felt his heart begin to hurt again. He had never seen her cry before. This strong girl was crying as if she had suffered a great grievance. Shun Julie's heart slowly clenched into a ball. And didn't he just see her twice? How could he be sure that she had never cried before? Shun Julie suddenly thought of this question. The gaze he looked at her with became a little complicated. What was his relationship with her in the past? Master and disciple relationship? But what part of her behavior was befitting of a disciple? And when she hugged his arm, he didn't feel disgusted at all. If it was someone else, he would have flung that person away before they could even touch his sleeve. Ning Xiaomo turned over on the bed and finally let go of his arm. He actually felt a little disappointed. Since when was he so intimate with his disciple? What did he take her for back then? "Stay with him," Ning Xiaomo mumbled. Shun Julie raised his eyebrows and asked, "What did you say?" Ning Xiaomo didn't say anything. She closed her eyes and slept soundly. Shun Julie felt that his behavior was a little silly. He actually talked to a drunkard in a serious manner. Therefore, he glanced at Ning Xiaomo and turned to leave. "If I had known that you would treat me like this, I would have stayed at Shui Alon's place." "What?" Shun Julie, who had walked to the door, suddenly turned back. The white light in his hand flickered, as if he was going to throw it out and hit the person on the bed in the next second. Finally, the white light dissipated. He stood by the bed and looked down at Ning Xiaomo. He said coldly, "No." Ning Xiaomo seemed to have heard him. She tactfully stopped talking and slept obediently. Chapter 12:17. After Shun Julie said this, He turned around and left. When Ning Xiuma woke up the next day, she felt dizzy. She had a splitting headache, and her brain felt like it was filled with paste. She shook her head and felt a wave of dizziness. Her vision darkened, and she almost fell off the bed. What happened to her? Did she get beaten up by someone? Ning Xiuma thought for a long time. Her slow brain finally started to work. She finally remembered that she drank a lot of alcohol. So, she was drunk. Ning Xiuma felt that it was a little strange. She had always been able to drink 1,000 cups. Previously, when she was in the special agent team, those people were all good drinkers. They came one by one to force her to drink, and she got them all drunk. After drinking, she could even go on a mission with a smile. But now she was drunk, and quite drunk. She almost couldn't remember how she came back last night. She sat on the bed for a while, trying to clear her head. However, her head was in a daze, and she couldn't remember anything. She shook her head. No, she had to go out for a walk. This was probably the bad effect of a hangover. She might be able to clear her head after getting some wind. Ning Xiuma casually ran her fingers through her hair. When she turned her head, she saw 2 stacks of clean clothes on the low cabinet at the head of the bed. Her eyes lit up, and she hurriedly took off her wrinkled dress and changed into a new one. When she went out and the wind blew, she felt a little better. She wandered around aimlessly, passing through the flowers and brushing the willows. Unknowingly, she walked to Tianyin Cliff. She stood on Tianyin Cliff and felt that her dizzy head seemed to have cleared up a little. Bits and pieces of what happened last night after she got drunk flashed through her mind. She hugged her head and couldn't remember anything. She tried to organize her memory. Last night, Yalu Jing and in a group of senior brothers led a large group of people to throw a party for her. Then she drank with Helian Xiao, and then her body suddenly stiffened. She seemed to have been brought back by the Almighty and then thrown into the water by him. The feeling of fear and helplessness in the water was too strong. She could still remember it. She pursed her lips. The Almighty was really heartless to her after he lost his memory. He seemed to have a special fondness for drowning her. Before he lost his memory, he had drowned her once, and after that, he did it again. It seemed that in this space-time, she was not only fated to fall from a high altitude, but also fated to be with water. An ill-fated relationship. She had already been drowned 4 times. She tried her best to suppress the negative emotions in her heart and began to divert her attention. All right, when I was drinking with Helian Xiao last night, Helian Xiao seemed to have mentioned Little Apple. He said that Little Apple had gone out to look for her and hadn't returned yet. Ning Xiuma did not give up and try to contact Little Apple in her mind. She chanted Little Apple's name several times, but there was still no response. She pursed her lips. The 10-year contract had ended, and the telepathy between them had indeed been broken. She wondered if such an innocent divine beast like Little Apple had been bullied during its days of wandering outside. If it couldn't find her, it would probably return to the Sun-Moon sect by itself, right? Then why didn't he come back? He was already back, so why wasn't Little Apple back yet? Could there have been an accident? Ning Xiuma's heart started to panic. No, she had to go out and look for it. Now that Kirin was so famous in the Tianci continent, as long as it walked around in a certain country, that country would definitely spread all kinds of news about it. Chapter 12:18. Little Apple? He was probably cursed to death by you, Momo. He didn't come back for 10 years. Maybe he was captured by someone, killed, or imprisoned. A little girl's voice absent-mindedly sounded in her heart. Her voice was calm and unhurried, as if she was talking about the weather. Ning Xiuma's hands clenched. Sure enough, as soon as her psychological defenses loosened, this little devil took the opportunity to run out and disturb her. She looked at the billowing sea of clouds below the cliff and looked at the golden sun in the distance. Her mood calmed down quite a bit. She said indifferently, "You're wrong, but I don't intend to spend time telling you what's right. So shut up. Don't come out to make your presence known." The little lowly in her heart, the little lowly's voice suddenly became gentle again, making people's hair stand on end. "Momo, you're really pitiful. Right now on this peak, only I can chat with you. Shen Julie has lost his memories and is doing his best to torment you. Little Apple is looking for you in who knows which corner. Hellion Xiao was implicated by you and had to go to the Cliff of Reflection to reflect on his mistakes for a year. Momo, you're really worthy of the reputation of being a jinx. You were born to become a devil. If you don't become a devil, you'll continue to implicate the people around you. Ning Xuema ignored her and slowly took a step forward. If she moved a little more, she would flip over. However, she was very calm. She calmly looked at the billowing sea of clouds and calmly threatened the little lowly. If you jump out and disturb me again, I'll let you have a taste of the drop tower. The little lowly, who was threatened again, finally exploded. She screamed, "Jump! Go ahead and jump. If you jump, you'll be smashed to pieces." But Momo, let me tell you, as long as your soul doesn't die, I'll exist forever with the world. At most, I'll just have to start over again. She suddenly went silent because Ning Xuema unexpectedly moved forward a little more without hesitation. This time, she only needed a little more strength, and Ning Xuema would flip over. Ning Xuema's lips curved into a smile as she unhurriedly asked, "Why don't you continue? I'm listening." The little lowly finally went silent. After a while, she said faintly, "If you die, all of this will be over. Shun Julie will no longer remember you." Ning Xuema's lips curved into a mocking smile. "Who cares?" The little lowly was stunned. She didn't understand what kind of language this was, and was stunned for a long time without saying anything. Ning Xuema stood there and looked down. A wave of dizziness came over her. She seemed to stumble slightly. When she finally steadied herself, she suddenly heard a cold voice behind her. "What are you doing?" It was Shun Julie. Why was he so elusive? Shocked, she lost her footing and accidentally he fell down. Ning Xuema wanted to curse out loud. She originally wanted to scare the inner demon little lowly, but she didn't expect to be scared by Shun Julie. Her psychokinesis was sealed and she couldn't use any strength. She could only wait for the Almighty to save her. He definitely wouldn't leave her in the lurch. Ning Xuema subconsciously raised her head and looked up. Shun Julie stood quietly at the edge of the cliff. There wasn't a trace of fluctuation in his eyes, and his face was indifferent. It was as if the person who had just fallen was just an insignificant ant. Ning Xuema opened her eyes wide in disbelief and stared at him. Shun Julie just looked at her indifferently and then moved away. Chapter 12:19. Ning Xuema felt as if she had been splashed with a bucket of cold water on a cold night. She felt cold from head to toe. Her blood vessels felt as if they had been frozen. He actually didn't save her. Ning Xuema fell through layers of clouds. The strong wind messed up her hair, causing it to dance in the air. Layers of fog covered her eyes. Shun Julie's face gradually blurred until it could no longer be seen. Ning Xuema stubbornly stared at the sky. No matter how strong the wind was or how bright the sun was, she kept her eyes wide open. She didn't believe that he would let her fall to her death in front of him. But Ning Xuema looked behind her and desperately found that the ground was rapidly enlarging at the moment when she was about to land. Ning Xuema silently closed her eyes. She bit her lips until they were white and her fingers were clenched tightly. She suddenly understood a terrible truth. He and she were originally heaven and earth apart. He was a god above the clouds, emotionless and desireless. She was an insignificant person in the mortal world who was struggling to climb up. She wanted to stand side by side with God and look down on the mortal world. Therefore, she tried her best to climb up and fly towards the clouds. In the end, she finally fell from the high clouds, fell through layers of dreams, and returned to her original position. "Momo, you are so pitiful." "Shut up." She was still more than 10 meters away from the ground. She was about to hit the protruding rocks below. Suddenly, her waist was tightened. Then, she was pulled up in an instant. Just like when she fell, Ning Xuema quickly passed through layers of clouds. But unlike before, she was now ascending. Layers of clouds were removed. Shun Julie's face gradually became clear. He still looked indifferent. He lowered his head and looked at her. There was no emotion in his eyes, but there was a green vine in his hand. In the end, he saved her. Ning Xiumao was placed at a place far away from the cliff. Her face was pale, and she was frightened. After a few deep breaths, her wildly beating heart slowly calmed down. "Why did you jump off the cliff?" Shun Juli's faint voice came. Why did she jump off the cliff? Wasn't it because they were frightened by his sudden appearance? Ning Xiumao opened her mouth. She wanted to angrily explain, but when she saw his indifferent, handsome face, she didn't say anything in the end. The corner of her mouth hooked up into a smile, and then she remained silent. The despair she felt when she fell from the sky was still lingering in her heart. The kind of sadness, despair, and discouragement swept over her like a tidal wave. The powerful negative emotions had almost completely enveloped her, to the extent that she still hadn't recovered from her shock. She told herself that he had saved her after all, so what was there to be dissatisfied about? However, Shun Julie's indifferent expression of looking on with folded arms still hurt her. That kind of expression felt like he was looking at a stranger who had reaped what he had sown. Because he cared, it was easier for him to be hurt by insignificant things. The closer they were to each other, the higher their demands would be. She placed him in her heart as the number one person. He treated her like a stranger and looked at her coldly. She was asking for too much now. She closed her eyes and didn't say anything. Shun Julie looked at her pale face and closed eyes. He felt a little uncomfortable, as if his heart was being pricked by a needle. After a pause, he spoke again with a cold voice. "Answer." Ning Xiumao looked at him and turned to leave. Her body froze. She was fixed there again. Chapter 12:20. Shun Julie slowly walked up to her from behind. His face was solemn. "Answer me." Ning Xiumao's lips curled into a faint smile. "Master, if I don't answer, are you going to pin me down for another day and night?" Shun Julie. Wasn't this disciple of his a little too arrogant? She was like a little hedgehog, constantly pricking people with her spikes. Although he didn't have any memories of his past, he subconsciously felt that his standards for accepting disciples seemed to be the gentle and intelligent type. This little disciple obviously didn't meet his requirements. How on earth did he accept her? Perhaps it was because she was a female disciple, so he spoiled her a little. Who asked her to be so impudent? His expression became even colder as he stared at her with an icy gaze. It was as if he wanted to freeze her. "How dare you not answer your master's question?" With his coldness on his face, the domineering aura on his body became even stronger. Even the surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped by a few degrees. Obviously, his bottom line had been touched by her. He really looked like an incomparably dignified master right now. No wonder everyone in the Sun Moon sect was so afraid of him. Even Yelu Jing, and held her breath when she saw him like a mouse seeing a cat. So this was his original state. So this was his attitude when he was no longer special to her. Ning Xiumao felt like a ball of wool was stuck in her heart. It was so stifling that her chest swelled up. Her smile became even wider, but her eyes were completely cold. "Master, you should know that I'm stubborn by nature. If I don't plan to say it, I won't say it no matter what. Even if you pin me down here, I won't say a single word. All right, I've said what I wanted to say. Master, please do as you please. No matter what kind of punishment, Xiumao won't say anything more. I'll definitely let Master be happy and satisfied with your punishment." Shun Julie, he left in a huff. Ning Xiumao silently watched him leave. She was wondering why she couldn't say a single word of explanation no matter what. Why did she have to make him angry? Ning Xiumao also felt very conflicted. She felt as if she had been split into two halves. Half of her wanted to throw herself into his arms and sleep. Half of them wanted to stand aside and provoke Shun Julie coldly. They wanted to see him get angry. That's right. She was taking revenge on him for leaving her in the lurch. He saved her, so did she have to be grateful and answer his questions? If she had treated him as an ordinary stranger, she would have thanked him for saving her life. But he wasn't. He was the one in her heart. If you want to blame someone, blame it on me loving you too much and caring about you too much. Ning Xiumao closed her eyes and thought silently. After spoiling her to the point that she was out of control, he simply forgot about her. She found it hard to balance out the disparity between them, so naturally, she wouldn't let him have it easy. Ning Shuima stood in the same place. The cold wind was biting cold, and she had a splitting headache. She felt as if her soul was going to float thousands of miles away with the wind. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, her acupuncture points heated up. Ning Shuima staggered and almost fell down again. She steadied herself. This time it wasn't bad. She was only set for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. She thought that she would have to stay on this cliff for another day in the cold wind. She rubbed her forehead and felt even dizzier. She rubbed her temples, trying hard to rub out the dizziness. She stood up and slowly walked back. When she passed by Shanjuli's main hall, she stopped in her tracks and stood there quietly. She stared blankly at the door that she could step through. Chapter 12:21. She stood there for what seemed like a century, as if she had been petrified. After a while, she pursed her lips and turned to leave. Suddenly, a cold voice came from the main hall. It was like a stream in early spring, but it still carried the chill of winter. "Come in." Ning Shuima was stunned. Her slow brain worked hard. She seemed to have heard Shun Julie's voice. She turned to look at the main hall, but there was no one in front of the main hall. She waited quietly for a long time. There was only the sound of the wind around her. Was she hallucinating? Ning Shuima shook her head and continued to walk forward. This time, the voice from the main hall was even colder. It had completely entered the cold state of midwinter. "Come in." So Shun Julie really called her. It wasn't her hallucination, Ning Shuima thought dizzily. She stepped in and went around the screen. She saw Shun Julie standing quietly in the middle of the main hall, looking at her expressionlessly. Ning Shuima looked at the comfortable chairs in the main hall and then looked at Shun Julie. She didn't understand why he didn't sit on the chairs, but insisted on standing. She spoke faster than her brain could react. She asked doubtfully, "Why do you insist on standing when there are chairs available?" After saying that, she realized that she had asked such a boring question. What did it have to do with her whether he was willing to stand? What was wrong with her today? Why didn't she keep her mouth shut? She just blurted out everything. Shun Julie's expression seemed to be blank for a moment. The words that he had prepared were all interrupted by her nonsensical question. He couldn't say anything else. Could he say that he had been standing behind the screen and quietly watching her until she came in? Then he walked back to the middle of the main hall. Shun Julie decided not to argue with her. He looked up at Ning Shuima and waved his sleeve. Ning Shuima felt her body lighten. The psychokinesis in her body began to flow vigorously again. She breathed a sigh of relief. Her psychokinesis was finally back. Shun Julie asked indifferently, "What level is your falling moon immortal technique at?" Ning Shuima looked at him in confusion. The falling moon immortal technique? What the hell was this? She had never heard of it before. Could it be that at some point he had taught him something, and then he had forgotten it completely? Ning Shuima thought for a moment and said, "Master, I've never cultivated this before." Shun Julie, was she really his disciple? Wasn't this the entry-level mental cultivation method of the 8th level? Could it be that he didn't have time to give her this mental cultivation method before he fell asleep? Forget it. It's not too late to cultivate now. He raised his hand and threw a book at her. Ning Shuima silently caught it. He said expressionlessly, "This book contains everything you need to cultivate. Memorize and comprehend this mental cultivation method tonight. Tomorrow, I will test you." Ning Shuima looked at the big book in her hand. It was thicker than a brick, and she felt even dizzier. She held the book in her hand and wanted to go out. "Stop," Shun Julie said. "What was it this time?" Ning Shuima turned around and looked at him. "Master, do you have any other orders?" Shun Julie's gaze fell on the book she was holding. His voice was slightly cold. "This book was personally written by me. It took a lot of effort. You're just going to carry it like this?" She was carrying the book as if she was carrying a garbage bag. There was no respect at all. Ning Shuima's head had been dizzy all this time. She really didn't pay attention to the way she was holding the book. Now that Shun Julie had reminded her, she didn't want to argue with him anymore. She held the book like she was holding a tribute. "Is this okay?" Chapter 1222. Shunjuli was speechless. Ning Xuema waited for a long time, but did not hear Shunjuli speak again. She frowned. Was it not enough for her to support him like this? What else did he want her to do? Let her do it on top of his head? Why was he so fussy and difficult to please? The fire in her heart seemed to be about to burst out again, so she looked up at him. Master, do you have any other instructions? Shunjuli said lightly, You may leave. After thinking for a while, he added, Memorize well. This time, Ning Xuema agreed readily. Yes, master. She turned around and strode away. After leaving the hall, Ning Xuema felt that her breathing was finally smoother. She always felt that there was a risk of suffocating when she was with Shunjuli. After he lost his memory, his spiritual pressure became frighteningly low. Everything was back to the beginning. Ning Xuema sighed. Did she have to start from the beginning? The more she thought about it, the more confused her mind became. She shook her head and felt that the road in front of her was swaying. She tried hard to suppress the dizziness, and only then did she feel better. When she returned to the room in the side hall, she casually threw the big book on the bed and threw herself on the bed. How could she memorize with her head in a daze? She should just wake up and memorize it. Anyway, she had a photographic memory and memorized it quickly. Ning Xuema thought in a daze. Countless scenes in her dream flew past, full of fantasy and warmth. On the ice field, the Almighty kissed her gently when she was not paying attention. Then, he said calmly, Ma. Because of her fate as a jinx, she was at a loss. When she was gradually disappointed in herself, he held her in his arms, stroked her head, and told her, Huma, don't be afraid. On Tianyin Cliff, they kissed each other goodbye. He stood in the wind and told her, Xuema, wait for me to come back. Every bit of it was the sweet memories she had with the Almighty. Ning Xuema stood quietly at the side. Looking at the once warm and colorful scenes, she felt a slight pain in her heart. How warm it used to be was how sad it was now. Why do people always remember the warmest and most beautiful memories when they are most frustrated? The sweetness of the past had now become a poison that pierced the intestines, but she was still willing to endure it. She held on tightly to that warm memory and healed the wound in her sleep. He was completely forgotten outside the dream, and from then on, he was just a passerby. Ning Xuema, who was sleeping, suddenly felt a strong wave of grief drowning her like a tide. She was so sad that she wanted to cry. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed by someone. She could do nothing but tremble in pain, just like the unforgettable despair in the cloud water lake yesterday. Gradually, that wave of grief slowly passed. She heard a faint sigh from the bottom of her heart. Pitiful Momo, why do you have to? Ning Xuema ignored her and slept quietly. It was as if he had never had those dreams and never heard her words. Ning Xuema, who was sleeping, suddenly felt a bright light in front of her eyes. Before she could react, she heard a loud noise. What happened? She wanted to get up, but found that her body suddenly tilted. Her whole body rolled down uncontrollably. Then, she was suddenly in the air and then fell to the ground with a bang. Ning Xuema was completely awakened by the fall. She jumped up in shock. Who is it? At the same time, she looked around. When she saw the situation around her, Ning Xuema was speechless. Her bed had collapsed, and the white light in the hands of the culprit had not dissipated. Chapter 1223. Shunjuli's face was so gloomy that it looked like it could drip water. He flicked his sleeves, and Ning Xuema was suspended in the air along with the big book. Then, she shot out of the window like an arrow. Was he going to throw her down the mountain in a fit of anger? Then why did he bring a book with him? The book that was suspended in the air suddenly went into her arms. Ning Xuema hugged the big book, and her face was full of black lines. What was he trying to do? Ning Xuema's body nimbly bypassed the screen and went through layers upon layers of rooms before flying into an antique room. A calming incense stick was lit in the middle of the room, and the smoke was rising in spirals. Soon, the room was filled with a sweet fragrance, making people feel relaxed and happy. The room was full of books, all kinds of ancient books. Ning Xiuma felt that she was thrown into the chair in front of the desk, and then the big book was slammed on the desk. Shunjili walked in slowly, and his face was still gloomy. If you don't finish memorizing this book today, you won't be able to sleep. With a flick of his sleeves, Ning Xiuma felt that her back was straightened instantly. Her head was looking straight ahead, and her arms were holding the book straight, just like a standard reading posture. At this moment, she could only move her arms, and the rest of her body was completely frozen. Ning Xiuma was speechless. Shunjili left in a huff. Ning Xiuma could only helplessly pick up the book and read it. Her mind was currently in a complete mess. She stared at the words for a long time before finally realizing what she was reading. Moreover, the room seemed to be too dark, causing her vision to darken. Well, it must be because the night-luminescent pearl had not been repaired for a long time. She needed to be brighter so that she could read properly. She subconsciously condensed a ball of fire in her hand and used it as a torch beside the book. Now, it was finally brighter. Ning Xiuma lifted her spirit and read for a while. After a while, her head started to feel dizzy again, and the words on the book started to shake, and then one of them split into two. She suddenly woke up. No, she had to finish memorizing this book, or there would be another storm tomorrow. She forced herself to focus on reading. 2 hours passed. Ning Xiuma felt that the words on the book had turned into little black tadpoles running around the book. Her head started to feel dizzy. The ground became uneven, and the luminous pearls turned from 1 to 2, 2 to 3. In the end, her vision turned black, and the book fell from her hand into the fire in her hand. The ancient book instantly burned. Ning Xiuma stared at the book that was licked by the tongue of fire for a long time before she realized that the book was burned. She quickly extinguished the fire in her hand, but the book was still burning. She couldn't move her body right now, so she couldn't get water even if she wanted to. After thinking about it, she steeled her heart and directly used her hand to extinguish the fire. Her little hand was instantly scalded red, but because of her high fever, her senses were sluggish and she didn't feel it. By the time she put out the fire, only a corner of the book was left. Her hands were also burning with pain. Ning Xiuma, she finally woke up. To be precise, she woke up in fright. God, she burned Shun Juli's precious book. Moreover, she was stuck here, so she couldn't run away even if she wanted to. When she was holding the book, he was still finding fault with it. If he found out that she burned the book, if Shun Juli saw it, he would definitely chop her up and throw her down the mountain. No, she had to run away before he found out. Ning Xiuma began to concentrate on using her psychokinesis to attack the acupuncture points that were stuck. Chapter 1224. Shun Juli was playing chess in the main hall when he suddenly smelled a strange smell. It was the smell of something burning. His heart sank. In a flash, he passed through countless rooms and arrived in front of the study. Ning Xiuma was holding a corner of what looked like the remains of a book. When she saw him, she was shocked and then looked at him innocently. Shun Jili was speechless. The corner of the book in her hand should be the falling moon immortal technique that he threw to her not long ago, right? In such a short period of time, the falling moon immortal technique that he had painstakingly written for half a year had been reduced to a smoking corner. This girl actually burned the book. Burned it. Shun Juli's indifferent expression finally cracked. With a wave of his hand, Ning Xiuma's acupoints were unsealed. Ning Xiuma was stunned. Just as she was about to run, her body suddenly became light. Then, she flew out of the study and sat on the floor of the main hall with a bang. She fell and sat there with a grimace, unable to get up for a while. Shun Jili stood in front of her, looking calm before the storm. "Explain," he said. Ning Xiuma hurriedly said, "I didn't do it on purpose. I saw that the room was too dark, so I started a fire." After she finished speaking, she seemed to feel that something was wrong, so she stopped. After a while, she finally understood. Oh God, playing with fire in the study? Was she a pig? How could she make such a stupid mistake? What was wrong with her today? Everything she did was out of place. Shun Julie's expression became even more gloomy. Ning Shuima's reason was really lame. Lighting a fire in the study? Was this disciple of his stupid? Would he believe this reason? Not to mention how bright the room was with luminous pearls. Even if she thought it was dark, she couldn't have lit a fire in the study. This was a matter of common sense. His disciple must have deliberately burned the book because she was lazy and didn't memorize it. Then, she made up such a lame reason to fool him. Why didn't he think of a good reason to fool him? The air pressure around Shun Julie became even lower, as if the air was about to be frozen. His gaze was cold, as if it came from a snowy night. Ning Shuima, if you continue to act like a fool, I will expel you from the sect. Expelled from a sect? Now he wanted to expel her from the sect. Had she already fallen to such a state? He didn't even want her to be his disciple anymore. Was he going to throw her down the mountain and never see her again? How could he do this? Did she come back just to be bullied? Could he use amnesia as an excuse to wantonly hurt his former lover? She had had enough. Ning Shuima only felt a fire burning within her, burning her eyes to the point that her eyes emitted a fiery light. However, an ice-cold chill rose in her heart, freezing her heart into a lump of ice. Her heart could only tightly curl into a ball and tremble. She closed her eyes and tried to tell herself to be rational. Whether you believe it or not, this is the truth. Shun Julie's reply to her was to leave in a huff. His cold voice came from the air. Ning Shuima, you are really unreasonable. She was unreasonable? Very well. He could just ignore her and she could scram. Did he think she cared? The fire in her heart burned more and more fiercely, and her head became more and more dizzy. Fatigue spread to her entire body. She rubbed her eyebrows and said in a hoarse voice, "Yes, I am unreasonable. I am really unreasonable. You can also ignore me. Didn't you want to expel me from the sect? Fine, expel me." Chapter 1225. As long as you're happy. I'm also tired. I don't want to play amnesia games with you anymore. She took out a pair of email piercers from somewhere and threw them in front of him. The email piercers fell to the ground and made a crisp sound. It was especially loud in the empty and quiet hall. Shun Julie's body seemed to stiffen, but Ning Shuima didn't care anymore. You gave this to me before. Now I'm giving it back to you. I don't want it anymore. I don't want it anymore, Ning Shuima said tiredly. She laid back on the bed, and darkness engulfed her like a tidal wave. Before she lost consciousness, she struggled to say one last sentence. Now you can throw me down the mountain? Shun Julie's heart suddenly jumped when he said that she would be expelled from the sect. He suddenly had a strange feeling. It was as if he was annoyed and heartbroken. But he didn't take this feeling to heart. He knew that she would definitely apologize and beg him to let her stay. When he heard the person in front of him agree to it, the uneasiness in his heart instantly increased. He turned around and saw her throw the email piercers that were always with him to the ground. That crisp sound made his heart tremble. It was as if an alarm bell had rung. He felt that he was about to lose something important. His heart fiercely clenched. Seeing her weakly faint on the ground, he rushed up to her without thinking and held her in his arms. Only then did he feel that her body was burning up. It was strange. Other people would have a red face or abnormally pale face when they had a fever, but her little face didn't have any of those symptoms. It was still pink and tender. If he hadn't held her, he wouldn't have noticed that she was burning up like this. She had a high fever. No wonder her actions were so messy. No wonder she was hugging the book to sleep. No wonder she burned the book. Guilt, annoyance, and heartache swept over him in an instant. It made his hands tremble slightly. He picked her up and quickly walked to the bedroom. He gently placed her on the bed. He was too careless. She had a fever and was confused. She didn't even notice it. He placed his hand on her pulse and checked her pulse. After a while, Shun Julie raised his eyebrows slightly. She seemed to be going crazy. Coupled with the cold from last night, her high fever had not subsided. This girl didn't even pay attention to herself. She didn't have the self-awareness of a patient. Not only did she run around everywhere, she even ran to the cliff to feel the cold wind. Then, she suddenly jumped off the cliff and was forced by him to recite the book. It must have been hard on her to only faint now. There seemed to be another kind of power in her body that was filled with a dark aura. If he was not wrong, her chi deviation should be related to this dark and ominous aura. The most troublesome thing was that this power was tightly entwined with her body. Without using a special method, it was impossible to separate them. Moreover, this force was almost on par with Ning Xiuma's own psychokinesis. Troublesome, very troublesome. Why did he accept such a troublesome disciple? There was a demon living in her body. She openly challenged him and threw a tantrum. When he asked her to expel him from the sect, she simply agreed and prepared to leave the mountain. She was so straightforward that Shun Juli felt like he was the one who was expelled from the sect. Although it was troublesome, his heart still ached when he saw her sad. When he heard that she wanted to cut off all ties with him, his heart was filled with endless fear. He really owed her in his previous life. When Ning Xiuma opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was a black pill. She was startled and reflexively tried to dodge it. However, she didn't expect that her body didn't have any strength and could only retreat slightly. Chapter 12:26. The owner of the hand glanced at her indifferently. "Why are you hiding?" Then, not allowing her to refuse, he stuffed the pill into her mouth. Shinjuli's hand accidentally brushed against her lips. He paused, as if there was a small claw scratching his heart. The pill melted in her mouth, and it was extremely bitter. Ning Xiuma had never eaten such bitter medicine in her life. It was as if she had used a ton of coptis to purify and refine it. What was worse was that she didn't even have the chance to spit it out. She tried to control her expression, but her little face couldn't help but scrunch up. After a while, she finally calmed down. "What did you give me?" Shun Juli's face turned cold, and his voice deepened. "You? Is this how you talk to your master?" Ning Xiuma. Yes, she didn't use honorifics. She should have said you. However, didn't he already expel her from the sect? Why did he still call himself master? Speak. Shinjuli couldn't stand her silence. He would rather she speak a few more words, even if she refuted. Ning Xiuma leaned back and closed her eyes. Her expression was somewhat tired. "Didn't I get expelled by your excellency? Did you forget?" Shun Juli's eyes turned cold, as if he wanted to say something, but when he saw her pale face, he suppressed the anger in his heart and said coldly, "Are you so eager for me to expel you from a sect? I won't let you have your wish." He put the medicinal soup on the table, flicked his sleeves, and left. Ning Xiuma opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling in a daze, not knowing what she was thinking. Suddenly, she looked down and saw that the bed under her had been replaced with a new one. The previous bed had been destroyed by Shun Juli, and she didn't know where he threw it. Looking at the sky outside, it seemed to be afternoon. Her gaze fell on the bowl of black medicinal soup on the table, and Ning Xiuma's eyes flashed with a complicated look. Did Shun Juli brew this for her? Although he was cold to her now, he still cared about her, right? After all, he hadn't expelled him from the sect. Ning Xiuma stood up. She didn't feel so dizzy anymore, and her thoughts were clearer. It was also because he had gone overboard yesterday. His fever had damaged his brain and burned the book that Shun Juli had painstakingly written for a year. If it were her, she would definitely fly into a rage and want to kill someone. When Shun Juli said that he wanted to expel her from the sect, she agreed without hesitation. Now that she thought about it, she was too reckless. If Shun Juli really expelled her from the sect in a fit of anger, she would not have the chance to reawaken his memories in the future. Ning Xiuma sighed. She was too impulsive. However, she did not intend to apologize to Shun Juli now. First of all, he was in a fit of anger now. If she went to him, she would definitely become cannon fodder. Second of all, she hadn't adjusted her mood yet. She hadn't figured out how to face Shun Juli, who was a cold and heartless master. Since she was bored, she would cultivate. Although she had accidentally burned the Falling Moon Immortal technique, she had at least read some of it. Although she had been dizzy at the time, she had subconsciously memorized the contents in front. Then, she would cultivate it first. After all, there was no harm in cultivating. Ning Xiuma sat down cross-legged and began to cultivate the falling moon immortal technique quietly. Although she had advanced to level 8, there was always a sense of madness in her psychokinesis, which made Ning Xiuma restless. She couldn't control herself and wanted to destroy everything. Chapter 12:27. As her cultivation of the falling moon immortal technique sped up, that trace of frenzy was finally suppressed. By the time Ning Xiuma opened her eyes, it was already evening. Her mood had calmed down quite a bit. He was currently in a state of amnesia, so she couldn't be too calculative with him. Perhaps she should go pay her respects? A disciple should pay her respects to her master. Ning Xiuma silently walked out of her room and slowly walked towards the main hall. Tianyin Peak was blooming with flowers all year round, and both sides of the path were randomly planted with exotic flowers and herbs. Any one of these flowers and herbs would be priceless treasures, but now they were casually growing here like weeds. Although they were casual, they were quite beautiful. Ning Xiuma looked at the flowers and plants along the way and felt much better. When she reached the main hall, she stopped in her tracks, and a trace of hesitation flashed across her eyes. She didn't have a good impression of this main hall. First, she had been trapped for a night, and then she had burned the books. Also, if Yunchi came back again, would she lose control and splash the tea on her face? Forget it. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Ning Xiuma's thoughts were in a mess. She stepped into the main hall and walked around the screen. There was no one in the hall. Shun Julie's favorite seat was empty, and the white pieces on the chessboard next to him were facing off against the black pieces. Where did he go? Could he have gone out with Yunchi? Ning Xiuma pursed her lips as she recalled the scene of Shun Julie and Yunchi getting along in the restaurant. She stood in the main hall and waited for a while, but she still didn't see Shun Julie's figure. Ning Xiuma was a little bored and was about to turn around and leave when she suddenly saw the chessboard next to her. Although the white pieces were facing off against the black pieces, the white pieces were already at a disadvantage. Ning Xiuma looked at it carefully for a while before she raised her hand and picked up a white piece and placed it on the chessboard. Then, he closed his eyes and thought for a while before placing the black piece in another position. She used to play chess with Shun Julie. At this time, when she saw the black and white pieces fighting fiercely on the chessboard, she couldn't help but feel itchy. She sat down and began to concentrate on playing chess with herself. She imagined Shun Julie's style of playing chess in her mind. Then, she imitated his style when she played the black pieces. When she played the white pieces, she was herself and used her own way of thinking. Black and white intertwined. She kept switching roles and was having a lot of fun. When Shun Julie came out of the study, he saw Ning Xiuma sitting not far away with her back to him. She was concentrating on playing chess. He slowly walked over and retracted his pressure. He quietly stood behind her and watched her play chess. Ning Xiuma was very focused on playing chess, and he hid his aura very well, so she did not notice that there was another person behind her. Shinjili was just curious at first, but slowly he became engrossed in the game. He found that Ning Xiuma would always think for a while before placing the black pieces, but she would place the white pieces very quickly. Thus, he carefully watched for a while. The more he watched, the more he felt that the black pieces were very familiar. Every move was very much to his taste, like it was his style. It turned out that this little girl was imitating him. It was the black pieces again. Ning Xiuma closed her eyes and thought for a long time. In this situation, where would he place the black pieces? After pondering for a long time, she still couldn't figure it out. Just as she was feeling distressed, a flawless hand suddenly appeared in front of her eyes and took the black piece from her hand and placed it somewhere on the chessboard. Chapter 12:28. Ning Xiuma was shocked. She turned around, but there was no one there. She was puzzled. When she turned around, she saw Shun Jili sitting across from her. He looked at her calmly and said, "It's your turn." Ning Xiuma was speechless. When did he come? Why didn't I notice him at all? It's easy to scare people when he comes and goes like a ghost, Shun Julie looked at her and frowned slightly. A chess game is like a battlefield. You can't be distracted. Ning Xuema calmed herself down and turned her attention back to the game. She looked at it for a while, then picked up a white chess piece and placed it somewhere. The crisp sound of chess piece landing on the board continued for a long time. Ning Xuema was fully focused on the game. In the end, she lost by a few pieces. She raised her head and looked at Shun Julie. Shun Julie's expression had softened a little. It was as if he finally realized that his disciple had some redeeming qualities. At the very least, she was good at chess and could hold her own against him for so long. Ning Xuema was about to say something, but Shun Julie said calmly, "There are 3 games. If you win one game, I won't pursue the matter of you destroying the book." He waved his sleeves, and the chess pieces on both sides were switched. Ning Xuema took the lead with a black chess piece. The two of them faced each other again. This game took a long time. Ning Xuema put in a lot of effort, but in the end, she still lost by a single chess piece. Ning Xuema rubbed her forehead. It was her last chance. The third game began. Ning Xuema used 200% of her energy to play. However, Shun Julie's style of chess was bold and powerful. Ning Xuema felt that she couldn't handle it. The black pieces were losing ground under the pursuit of the white pieces. It looked like she was about to be completely blocked. Shun Julie looked up at her and saw that she was being forced to retreat. She was frowning and deep in thought. He was slightly distracted. When he came back to his senses, the light in his eyes flickered. In the end, he pinched a black stone and placed it in the wrong place. Ning Xuema was out of breath. Just as she was about to lose, a sudden turn of events appeared, so she tried her best to seize this opportunity to counterattack. In the end, Ning Xuema narrowly won by a single point. The chessboard was like a battlefield. One moment of weakness would lead to complete defeat. Shun Julie looked at his defeated white piece in silence. Ning Xuema finally revealed a smile. "Master, thank you for letting me win. Your disciple has won." Shun Julie looked at Ning Xuema's happy smile, and the last bit of discomfort in his heart dissipated. It didn't matter if he let her win. Perhaps he didn't want to punish her any more from the bottom of his heart. He finally showed a faint smile, got up, and patted her head. "Come back tomorrow." Again, Ning Xuema felt a headache coming. Countless of her brain cells had died in these 3 games. If she played again, wouldn't all of them die? Forget it. She would just treat it as practicing her chess skills. Ning Xuema nodded and looked up. "Then I'll go back first." Shun Julie suddenly reached out to check her pulse. She subconsciously wanted to pull away, but she couldn't. In the end, she compromised and let him hold her hand. After a while, Shun Julie let go of her hand and looked at her lightly. "Have you taken a medicine?" Ning Xuema, she didn't. Shun Julie knew the answer when he saw her blank expression. His face darkened. "Go back and drink the medicine. Come back tomorrow to get it." So there was still another bowl after drinking one bowl. Ning Xuema frowned almost imperceptibly and finally nodded. "Okay." She looked up at Shun Julie and saw that he didn't have any other orders, so she turned and left. Chapter 1229. When Ning Xuema returned to her room, she was still in a daze. Had her relationship with Shun Julie warmed up a little? Her gaze fell on the bowl of medicine that had already turned cold. She frowned and drank the medicine in one gulp. Bitter. It was so bitter that Ning Xuema wanted to bang her head against the wall. What kind of medicinal herbs could be used to make such a bitter and earth-shattering medicinal soup? Was Shun Julie really not deliberately taking revenge on her? Ning Xuema lay on the bed like a corpse for a long time before she recovered from the bitterness. When she thought of the bowl of medicine tomorrow, she felt that she had nothing left to live for. She slowly got up and continued to practice. She had no choice. She had nothing else to do now. Besides practicing, she could not think of anything else to do. The next day, Ning Xuema woke up early to greet Shinjioga. Shun Julie was already minding his own business playing chess. When he saw her, he waved to her and said, "Come here." Thus, they played another 3 rounds of chess. Ning Xuema rubbed the space between her eyebrows. Playing a few rounds of chess felt more tiring than cultivating for 3 days and 3 nights. Her brain cells were dying in large chunks. She felt as if she had overused her brain, causing her head to feel dizzy. Suddenly, a porcelain bowl carved from jade appeared in front of her. In the bowl, the black medicinal liquid was steaming. Ning Xiumo. How refreshing. She bitterly tried to negotiate with Shun Jiuli. Master, I just have a fever. You don't have to make such a big fuss. This bowl of medicine is so precious. It's a bit of a waste to use it on a cold, right? Shun Jiuli faintly raised his eyebrows. Either drink it yourself, or I'll help you. Help her? He wouldn't force her to drink it, would he? Ning Xiumo was speechless. She took the bowl of medicine with a solemn expression on her face. She took one last look at Shun Jiuli and saw that he had no intention of taking back his words. She gritted her teeth and gulped down the medicine in one gulp. Shun Jiuli, he had never seen such a bold and unrestrained way of drinking medicine. It was even more straightforward than drinking wine. Ning Xiumo was in so much pain that she wanted to jump up and knock herself unconscious. This was beyond the limits of human endurance. She forcefully restrained her desire to go on a rampage and stood there quietly to digest the medicine. Shun Jiuli looked at her almost lifeless expression and asked with a hint of doubt, "So bitter." "Nonsense. Why don't you give it a try?" Ning Xiumo finally recovered. She said weakly, "Master, is this the last bowl?" Shun Jiuli glanced at her and said, "No." Ning Xiumo. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that there was a trace of sympathy in his eyes. Ning Xiumo's current life was very two-pronged. She would wake up in the morning to pay her respects. Then, she would drink a bowl of bitter medicinal soup to refresh herself. After that, she would play chess until noon. In the afternoon, she would cultivate the falling moon immortal technique. At night, she would go pay her respects again. After drinking a bowl of medicinal soup, she would go back with a bitter expression. However, when she went there tonight, it seemed a little different. After entering the hall, a fair hand handed her the medicinal soup. Ning Xiumo didn't give herself any time to hesitate and gulped it down. Just as she was about to die from the bitterness, she suddenly felt something warm on her lips. Then, something was stuffed into her mouth. Ning Xiumo was furious. She hadn't even finished digesting the medicinal soup, and now there was a new one. This was the rhythm of making her suffer to death. Just as she was about to spit out the thing in her mouth, she suddenly felt a trace of sweetness on the tip of her tongue. It slowly drove away the bitterness. She paused and looked up at Shun Jiuli. He was looking at her quietly. Chapter 1230. Seeing that her expression wasn't as sorrowful as before, he looked away and asked lightly, "Is it still bitter?" Ning Xiumo shook her head and answered instinctively, "It's not bitter anymore." "Master, is this candy?" It seemed to be fruit-flavored too. Shun Jiuli nodded and waved his hand, indicating that she could leave. Ning Xiumo walked back slowly, feeling the sweetness on the tip of her tongue all the way to the bottom of her heart. She didn't expect that the great god would specially get candy for her. He probably went to the mortal world to buy it, right? And fruit-flavored too. Ning Xiumo thought that the aloof and emotionless great god secretly went to the mortal world to buy a bunch of candy back to the Sun Moon sect. She felt a little amused and touched at the same time. If Yelu Jing and the others knew about this, their eyeballs would probably fall out of their sockets when she returned to her room. Ning Xiumo was stunned when she saw her reflection in the mirror. Who was that girl in the mirror with a love-struck smile on her face? She quickly stopped smiling. Then, she started to smile again unknowingly, like a girl in love for the first time. She was hopeless. Ning Xiumo threw herself on the bed and thought in annoyance. After a while, her lips curled into a smile that came from the bottom of her heart. But her heart was really sweet. Ning Xiumo hugged the blanket and rolled around on the bed like a young girl. Then, she got up and continued to cultivate. She had been cultivating the falling moon immortal technique for the past few days. She felt that the negative emotions in her heart had lessened a lot, and her mood had improved a lot. Especially after drinking the medicine that Shun Jiuli had brewed for her, Her emotions had calmed down a lot. She no longer wanted to flip the table in a fit of rage. Ning Xiuma enjoyed a rare moment of concentration as she sat on the bed and cultivated wholeheartedly. The moonlight slowly flowed in through the window, coating her with a layer of silver. It reflected the brilliant golden light from cultivating the falling moon immortal technique, making her look exceptionally beautiful. She was dressed in white and sat there quietly. Her body was covered in the splendor of the sun and moon, and there were fragments of golden light constantly flashing. Her long eyelashes were obediently still, like a row of small fans. She was like an elegant fairy, beautiful and tranquil. However, halfway through her cultivation, she suddenly stopped. His heart sank. He hadn't finished reading the rest of the falling moon immortal technique. Now that he had reached that point, forcefully stopping would only result in a backlash. An ominous red light seemed to flash around her body. Ning Xiuma only felt that the psychokinesis in her body suddenly shook, and then it started to move around unsteadily. Her tendons and veins were in great pain, as if they were about to explode. Her face instantly turned pale as cold sweat dripped down her face. Her entire body was trembling, and her body was curled into a ball like a shrimp. Her heart tightened bit by bit, and her breathing became more and more difficult. It was as if someone was strangling her neck and tightening it bit by bit, causing her to lose oxygen bit by bit. She suddenly felt something sweet in her throat, and then she spat out a mouthful of blood. Before she lost consciousness, she fumbled for the snow-white sound transmission talisman in her bosom. Master. At this moment, Shun Juli was writing something in his study room with a pen. His pen was like flowing water, and he wrote domineering and restrained words one by one. As he was writing, his mind suddenly became absent-minded. When he came back to his senses, he was still a little confused. Why did he suddenly become absent-minded? Could it be that he, as her master, also became absent-minded after spending so much time with his erratic disciple? Chapter 12:31. Before he could finish this thought, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, as if someone was gripping his heart tightly. The tip of his pen trembled, and a drop of ink fell and stained the paper. The directed audio spell suddenly lit up, and an extremely weak voice came from it. Master. Something had happened to her. Shun Juli moved and flew towards the side chamber like a bolt of lightning. The door was blasted open by his palm, and the situation inside almost made his heart sink. Ning Xiuma's eyes were tightly closed, and she was lying on the bed with a pale face. There were bloodstains on her lips, and her clothes were covered in blood. Her whole body was drenched in cold sweat, and she was tightly curled up into a ball, trembling at the moment. Shinjili rushed over and picked her up. It was only then that he realized that she had fainted. He checked her pulse and found that it was erratic. The psychokinesis in her body seemed to be running wild. She was possessed by the devil. What a troublesome idiot. Shinjili helped her up and pressed one hand on her back. A strong and mighty psychokinesis was transferred into Ning Xiuma's body, smoothing out the psychokinesis in her body bit by bit, and gently repairing her meridians and internal organs that were damaged by the psychokinesis. After finishing all this, 2 hours had passed. Shinjili threw her back on a bed, not too gently, and was about to go back and write his book. When he walked to the door, he suddenly heard Ning Xiuma moaning, "Great master, I'm in so much pain." He helplessly turned around and saw that she had curled up into a ball again. He checked her inner breath again and found that everything was normal. This should be the hallucination of her being possessed by the devil. Shun Juli was about to withdraw his hand, but Ning Xiuma's little hand had already grabbed his hand and childishly put his hand on her cheek as a pillow, as if she was afraid that he would run away. Ning Xiuma vaguely saw that there seemed to be a person in white in front of her, and her heart ached. She felt wronged and said, "Great master." Then she slowly closed her eyes. Shun Juli's mind shook. Ever since that time, when he punished her by making her stand for an entire night, she had never called him great God again. She had suddenly changed the way she addressed him as master, which made him a little uncomfortable. Now that she was asleep, she was acting coquettishly and calling him Almighty. Shunjuli could feel the warmth and softness of Shunjuli's hand as a pillow as she held it tightly in her hand. Shunjuli's heart suddenly softened. He sat down and quietly watched her sleeping face. There were faint bruises under her eyes, which seemed to be caused by a lack of sleep. Shunjuli's eyes darkened. He lowered his eyes and seemed to be thinking about something. Ningxiuma suddenly opened her eyes. The color of her eyes was pure red, so red that they were like gems. She suddenly giggled. It was a cute child's voice. Great God! Momo misses you so much. Shunjuli's heart sank. Ningxiuma's original body was injured and temporarily fell into a deep sleep because of the qi deviation. Her inner demon naturally replaced her and appeared. There seemed to be a white light flickering in his hand, but he didn't release it. That sweet child's voice sounded again. You have to endure it. If you do, Momo will lose her life. Shunjuli's eyes darkened. The white light suddenly released and enveloped Ningxiuma. She let out a mournful scream, and that child's voice became a little distorted. I knew you were such a heartless person. I knew you would definitely do something to Momo. Shunjuli lightly said, the demon's subduing spell is only effective against devils. Chapter 1232. Ningxiuma's expression was a little twisted because of the pain, but she still had a smile on her face. Momo will become a demon sooner or later. Shunjuli's eyes darkened. The white light that shrouded Ningxiuma suddenly intensified. Ningxiuma screamed again. Her red eyes widened and stared at Shunjuli. She screamed, she will become a demon sooner or later. The white light continued to intensify. Ningxiuma finally couldn't stand it anymore. She retreated unwillingly. Ningxiuma also gradually closed her eyes. She fell into a deep sleep again. Shunjuli said lightly, she won't. No one knew who he was talking to. He turned and left. When Ningxiuma woke up the next day, she felt a little weak. She suddenly remembered that she was possessed by a demon last night. Her heart sank. She closed her eyes and operated the psychokinesis in her body. It was still very active and stable. She finally breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she didn't lose all her psychokinesis. Some fragmented images suddenly flashed in her mind. They seemed to be her memories, but they also seemed to be not her. In every image, the Almighty seemed to have barged in after she fainted and smoothed out her meridians. Then she held the Almighty's hand tightly and kept acting coquettishly. However, he didn't push her away. Instead, he sat down quietly and accompanied her. After that, what was after that? Ningxiuma's memory was blank. There was no follow-up. She shook her head. Forget it. She didn't want to think about it. It was getting late. It was time to play chess with the Almighty. When she walked into the main hall, Shunjuli was standing with his back facing her. The cloud patterns on his loose, white robe flowed slowly. There was a faint brilliance around his body. It was the back of a high and mighty god. He seemed to be thinking about something. He didn't notice Ningxiuma coming in. Ningxiuma didn't know why, but she felt a little uncomfortable. She felt that the person in front of her seemed to be a little unreachable. However, this feeling only lasted for a moment. Ningxiuma directly called out to him, Master. Shunjuli turned around. His expression was a little cold. You're awake? Ningxiuma was a little confused by his cold expression, but she still nodded in response to his nonsense. Yes, I'm awake. Shunjuli's fingers moved slightly, and Ningxiuma felt a strong force pushing her towards Shunjuli. Then, she stopped when she touched his sleeve. When she looked up, she saw Shunjuli's godlike face. This distance was too close. Ningxiuma resisted the desire to retreat. She raised her eyebrows and stood in front of him. Master? Shunjuli checked her pulse and finally released it after a while. He looked at her coldly. Ningxiuma, you haven't even finished reading the cultivation method, and you're already practicing it. How many lives do you have to be so reckless? Ningxiuma's lips moved. Finally, she looked down. Master, you're right. Indeed, she was too reckless. She shouldn't have randomly cultivated. When she looked up again, Shun Juli was already gone. Ning Xuema was confused. Where did he go? She stood there in a daze for a long time. Shun Juli walked out with a book in his hand. When he saw her looking at him in confusion, he threw the book that he had been working on for a few nights to her. Read it carefully. Memorize it well. 5 Days of Inner Heart Sutra has reached level 3. Ning Xuema caught it instinctively. When she saw the title, she almost jumped up in shock. Wasn't this the falling moon celestial method that she had accidentally burned? Why was there another one now? Could it be? She flipped to a page and found that the ink was still fresh. Chapter 1233. Did the Almighty write another book overnight? Especially for her. Ning Xuema suddenly felt a little sour, but also a little sweet. Even if the Almighty lost his memory, he still couldn't help but treat her well. Right? He really did love her. Why did he lose his memory? Did he meet with an accident? Looking at Shun Juli's indifferent face, the question that had been hovering in her heart for a long time finally surfaced. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she still insisted on asking, Almighty, why did you forget me? Shun Juli's eyes moved, quietly looking at her without saying a word. Time passed little by little, as if a century had passed. Just when Ning Xuema thought she wouldn't get an answer, Shun Juli's indifferent voice sounded. This lord sleeps once every 900 years, and after 10 years, I will forget the past. Ning Xuema's eyes widened in surprise. Damn, what kind of setting is this? The Almighty actually lost his memory frequently? She couldn't help but ask why. Shun Juli turned to leave, his voice drifting in the air. This lord also doesn't know why. Although his voice was as indifferent as usual, Ning Xuema felt a trace of disappointment. Ning Xuema stood there quietly, not returning to her senses for a long time. Her eyelashes drooped, and her fingers were tightly clenched. Since the Almighty knew about this problem, why didn't he tell her before? Was it because he didn't have time? But she had been with him for so long that he had countless opportunities to tell her about it. She loved him so much, so she definitely wouldn't leave him because of this matter. So what was his concern that he never mentioned it to her? Not even half a word. Or, Ning Xuema suddenly didn't dare to think about it anymore. The little lowly in her heart suddenly appeared, and said something that she didn't dare to think about. Momo, have you ever thought? Maybe he didn't plan to be with you for a long time, so it doesn't matter if he forgot about you? The little lowly sweetly stabbed her in the heart. Ning Xuema's heart trembled. She took a deep breath and said quietly, Impossible. The little lowly's indifferent voice sounded. All right, Momo, you're always right. You're always deceiving yourself, deceiving your own heart. After throwing down this bomb, the little lowly calmed down and no longer spoke. Ning Xuema suddenly felt a little cold. She took a deep breath and tried her best to tell herself not to let her imagination run wild. Perhaps the Almighty had simply forgotten to tell her. She shouldn't recklessly guess the Almighty's original feelings for her. The most important thing in a relationship was trust. She couldn't lose her trust in the Almighty just because of a few words from her inner demons. The Almighty would be disappointed when he returned. A bowl of black medicinal soup suddenly appeared and was stuffed under her nose. Ning Xuema looked up and saw Shun Juli's expressionless face. He said lightly, Take the medicine. So he just wanted to get the medicine for her. He didn't abandon her and leave. Ning Xuema's heart suddenly warmed. She looked at the bowl of medicine in front of her, which she always wanted to find an opportunity to smash in the past. She suddenly found it particularly pleasing to the eye today. She almost happily took the bowl of medicine and drank it in one gulp. Shun Juli, he just wanted to get the medicine. Why was his disciple acting strangely again? She usually avoided medicine like the plague, so why was she so happy to take it today? Chapter 1234. Could it be that his inner demon had seized the opportunity to possess him again? Shun Juli stuffed a piece of candy into her mouth and checked her pulse. It was quite normal. There wasn't any demonic aura. Ning Xiuma could feel the sweetness on the tip of her tongue gradually spreading out as the bitter taste dissipated bit by bit. Just like her mood, it slowly became sunny and bright. Those doubts, fears, and disappointments were like the white snow of spring, gradually dissipating. She looked at Shun Julie with a trace of determination. She couldn't ask him why he hadn't told her before, but she could seize the moment and make him fall in love with her again. 900 years was enough for him to fall in love with her again. Maybe they would even have a baby by then. After 900 years, when he was about to fall asleep, she would stay by his side and make the first person he saw when he woke up. Then, she would tell him a story of what had happened between them. He had walked so close to her this time. Would she be the first person he saw when he woke up? That was most likely the case. When the Almighty woke up, he wouldn't have any memories and would be like a blank piece of paper. Naturally, he would believe whatever Yunchi said. That was strange. Why didn't Yunchi take the opportunity to say that she was the Almighty's wife? Maybe the Almighty would really recognize her. No way. Fortunately, she hadn't said that. It seemed like Yunchi wasn't that thick-skinned. Otherwise, she wouldn't even have a chance now. Therefore, she had to seize the moment. Ning Xiuma flashed a bright and beautiful smile. Shun Julie was swayed by her bright and beautiful smile. As he looked at her delicate little face, he suddenly felt nostalgic. How long had it been since he'd seen her smile without any scruples? It had been too long, so long that he had almost forgotten. Previously, when he'd looked at her, he'd felt that something was wrong. At the time, Ning Xiuma had been gloomy and silent. She'd always had a gloomy aura around her. Subconsciously, she'd seemed different from a Ning Xiuma he'd subconsciously known. Therefore, he'd been at a loss and had used all sorts of methods to correct her. Now, looking at her, smiling brightly in front of him, he finally felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart. Ning Xiuma suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but ask, "Master, you said that you sleep for 10 years every time? But why did you only sleep for 8 years this time?" She had already found out that Shun Julie had returned to the Sun-Moon sect 2 years ago. Shun Julie's eyes darkened slightly, and he shook his head. Master doesn't know. He glanced at her again. You want Master to wake up after 10 years? Do you think I woke up too early? How could this be? Ning Xiuma immediately shook her head. I'm just a little curious. She looked at Shun Julie again. There shouldn't be many people who knew that he slept every 900 years, right? The Almighty had been so nice to her, and they were so close, but he had never revealed this secret to her. Now, he had told her so easily. Subconsciously, he still trusted her, right? From the looks of it, it shouldn't be too difficult to get him back. It was as if Ning Xiuma saw a beautiful future waiting for her. Her eyebrows and eyes were filled with unconcealable happiness. Shun Julie patted her head. Go, cultivate the falling moon immortal technique well. Don't disappoint Master's expectations of you. Ning Xiuma took the thick and heavy book and solemnly nodded her head. All right, Master. She turned around and walked out. Suddenly, she turned around and stood with her back to the light. She sent a flying kiss to the Almighty. Moi, Almighty. Chapter 1235. Damn it. She really wanted to fly into his arms and give him a loud kiss on the cheek. But she was also afraid that he would give her a scare and send her flying. That wouldn't be worth it. So she had to take it slow. Anyway, she was already at Earth Stage Level 8 and had a lifespan of 1,000 years. She had plenty of time to waste with him. She, Ning Xiuma, could get whatever she wanted. So what if the Almighty lost his memory once? She would still get him back. The next time he fainted, she would stay by his side. If they had a child, she would let the child stay by his side. He would try to forget about her again. That's right. After they reconciled, she would force him to write a diary about everything that happened between them. When he woke up, she would throw the diary he had written at him and make him read it himself. That would be the living proof. He had to admit it, even if he didn't want to. At most, she would fall in love with the Almighty again every 900 years. He would be so cute and gullible when he woke up. She wondered if he would be shocked if she mischievously said that she was his mother. Julie looked at the person in front of him who was covered in a layer of golden light. A strong sense of familiarity rose in his heart. It was as if this scene had happened not long ago. However, he couldn't find it even after searching his memory. Strangely, he understood the meaning of this sentence. He smiled faintly. His thin lips parted slightly as he spat out, "Moi." Ning Xuema felt that she had floated back to her room. Her soul hadn't returned yet. She spun around a few times on the spot before she calmed down. It was as if she was talking about her first love with the Almighty again. She loved the Almighty, and the Almighty had a good impression of her now. She flipped open the big book and looked at the familiar handwriting. Her heart felt warm, as if it was stuffed with a small stove. Determination flashed across her eyes. She had to cultivate the falling moon immortal technique as fast as possible. For days, no, 3 days. Cultivate to level 3 and then give the Almighty a surprise. For a genius like her, cultivating a mental cultivation method would definitely be a piece of cake. Ning Xuema began to practice her mental cultivation method day and night. Her morning and evening greetings were also waved by the Almighty. With her optimistic state of mind and her hard work in cultivation, her psychokinesis increased like a sesame seed blossoming. There was a new change every day. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Ning Xuema's body suddenly burst into a circle of brilliant, colorful light. It was as if she was bathing in the multicolored light, making her even more dazzling. When the colorful light dissipated, she sensed her body on the bed and then jumped up. Success! He had cultivated the falling moon immortal technique to the 3rd level. Ha ha ha! I am indeed a rare genius. Leveling up 1 level a day was like child's play. The great god's requirements were already strict enough. He didn't expect that he would be able to complete the task so early. The great god must be surprised, right? He would definitely think that he had picked up a treasure by taking her in as his disciple. She opened the door and rushed out like a tornado. The joy in her heart overflowed, and she didn't want to hide it anymore. She hadn't seen him for 3 days. To be honest, she really missed him. Now that she had successfully cultivated and was going to see him, she wondered what his expression would be when he saw her. Gratified? Happy? Excited? Maybe he would be so happy that his memory would come back. Cough, cough. She was thinking too much. Ning Xuema's heart thumped wildly. Chapter 1236. She was so excited that her heart almost jumped out of her chest at the thought of being able to see the Almighty's surprised expression. She thought that the great deity would definitely be unable to restrain himself from patting her head and faintly smiling. Not bad. Xuema deserves to be called a little genius. Just like the day when she first learned how to fly on a sword, he suddenly stood on her sword and gently wrapped his arms around her waist. He smiled lightly beside her ear and said, "Little genius, take this lord for a spin." His breath was right beside her ear, causing her earlobe to unconsciously turn red and her heart to slightly ripple. Ning Xuema felt a strong sense of happiness when she thought of that scene. There were specks of light in her eyes, as bright as the stars. Her petal-like lips faintly curled into a smile, bright and confident. Almighty, no matter how many times you forget, Ning Xuema will accompany you to the end and pester you for life. Ning Xuema rushed into the main hall like a whirlwind. Julie was not inside. Could he be in the study room? She went to the study room again. There was no one in the study room. Ning Xuema searched all the rooms, but could not find Julie. She saw a bowl of soup in the pharmacy. It was black and steaming. It looked like it had just been decocted. Where was he? Ning Xuema walked closer and found a note under the bowl. There were a few words written on the note. Drink the medicine while it's hot. The note was written in a simple and concise style. It was obvious that it was written by Julie. He left a note for her to drink the medicine instead of personally urging her to drink it. Did he go out for something? What did he do? How long would he be back? Was it dangerous? Would it be like the last time and not come back for a long time? Ning Shumo looked at the note quietly, as if she could see a flower in it. She felt a little disappointed. She was like a child who got full marks in an exam and wanted to share her happiness with her parents, only to find out that her parents had gone overseas for a vacation. She sighed and looked at the note again. She didn't know what she was thinking, but she carefully folded the note and put it in her arms. This could be considered the Almighty's first letter to her, although it was just a short sentence. Ning Xuema had a headache as she looked at the medicinal soup that she had neglected for a long time. The light in his eyes flickered as he picked it up and brought it to his nose. The bitter smell was so strong that it hurt his brain. Every time she drank this medicine, she had the urge to smash it. She had never thought that she would be traumatized from drinking medicine. She was a doctor herself, but she couldn't figure out the composition of the dregs after studying them for a long time. If she didn't know that the Almighty wouldn't harm her, she would have thought that the medicine was made to punish her. She silently held the bowl of medicine and walked to a bonsai. Just as she was about to use the medicine to nourish the flowers and plants, her sharp eyes suddenly noticed that there seemed to be a note in the bonsai. It said, "Don't throw it away." Ning Shumo, Guru, you're really good at predicting things. In the end, she tilted her head back and gulped down the medicine. She subconsciously waited for the candy, but suddenly realized that the Almighty had already left. Ning Shumo finally walked out of the hall, slowly. She wandered around aimlessly. Her eyes couldn't help but wander around. Did the Almighty leave a note somewhere else for her to find? She felt as if she was looking for treasure. Ning Shumo looked up unintentionally and seemed to have noticed something. She stopped in her tracks, her body stiffened, and her gaze focused. Chapter 12:37. Not far away, two figures could be seen riding the wind. One of them was dressed in a white robe that fluttered like an immortal, while the other was dressed in a light yellow robe that fluttered in the wind. The two of them were very close to each other. Their figures were like an immortal couple, so beautiful that it was like a dream. It was the Almighty and Yunshi. She felt as if her head had been hit by a stick. Her heart seemed to have stopped for a few seconds. Ning Xuema froze on the spot, feeling her fingertips turn cold. Why were they together? Where are they going? Why hadn't he told her anything before? She stood in place for about half a minute. Her originally happy mood had completely flown away. Her heart felt extremely heavy, as if a lead ball had been dropped on it. She thought for a moment and finally took out a voice transmission talisman. When she saw the color of the talisman, she couldn't help but laugh bitterly. When she had been imprisoned by Shui Ilan, most of Ning Xuema's treasures had been kept by him. Every time Shui Ilan brought her out of the barrier, he would take away her treasures and return them to her when they returned to the barrier. This included the voice transmission talisman that the Almighty had given her and the moonlight sword that had almost stabbed her to death. After she had been rescued by the Almighty, he hadn't given her anything new. This meant that she didn't have any tools to contact the Almighty now. The voice transmission talisman in her hand was just an ordinary one from the Sun Moon sect. She could use it to contact Yalu Jing and the other senior brothers, but she couldn't contact the Almighty directly. Forget it. Perhaps the Almighty really had something to do and had gone out. Since he hadn't told her his whereabouts, perhaps he would be back soon. She couldn't always compare him to before he had lost his memory. Now, he only treated her as his disciple. She didn't need to worry too much about it. She didn't want to make things difficult for herself. Momo, poor Momo, you've been abandoned again. The little Loli's voice in her head was filled with schadenfreude. Ning Xuema finally came back to her senses. She took a deep breath, looked into the distance one last time, and turned to leave. He ran away with Yunshi. He doesn't want you anymore. Momo, aren't you sad that they let you down? Aren't you sad? I can hear your heart crying again. It says it's too tired. It says it doesn't want to be sad anymore. Momo, can you hear that? Little Loli's sweet voice was filled with malice. Ning Xuema pursed her lips and didn't say anything, but her tightly clenched fingers betrayed her emotions. Momo, you won't be sad if you become a demon. Once you become a demon, you'll have powerful abilities that will be enough to kill Yunshi 100 times. The little Loli's persuasive voice echoed in her mind over and over again. Ning Xiuama pushed open the door of her room and sat quietly at the desk. Momo, why are you so against becoming a devil? You must know that you're a demon. Human emotions are just a burden to you. The little lowly's voice was ethereal, with a hint of enchantment. If one's mind was not firm enough, it would be easy to fall into her voice. Ning Xiuama raised her eyes and looked at the lush trees outside the window. She listened to the melodious chirping of the birds outside the window and said indifferently, I'm indeed very sad and very upset. I also really want to drag Yinshi over and beat her up. There's a way. The little lowly was overjoyed. Her voice was even more ethereal and dreamy. It was so melodious that it seemed to float from the horizon with a faint echo. Then become a demon. Momo, once you become a demon, you'll be emotionless and loveless. No one will be able to hurt you then. Ning Xiuama's voice was as clear as water as it flowed into her ears. However, if I become a demon and a heartless and loveless monster, will I still be me? What's the difference between me and a machine? Chapter 1238. Plus, the first thing I'll do after becoming a demon is to drag you out and beat you up. She paused, and her tone turned cold with a hint of mockery. So, shut up. You're just a little kid, yet you want to get involved in adult matters? Little Lolita was speechless. Little Lolita imitated Ning Xiuama's cold and mocking tone. You'll regret it. You'll definitely regret it. I'll wait for Shun Julie to hurt you until you're covered in cuts and bruises. I'll wait for you to come begging me. The corners of Ning Xiuama's lips curled up slightly as she replied nonchalantly, Okay, then you'll have to wait. Little Lolita was speechless through the constant struggle with her heart's devil. Ning Xiuama felt that her sadness had lessened quite a bit, especially when her heart's devil was choked to the point that it couldn't speak. She even smiled. Suddenly, she thought of something. The Almighty also needed friends. No matter how much she loved him, she couldn't restrict him from making friends. The Almighty only treated Yunshi as a friend. Although Yunshi was interested in the Almighty, she hadn't succeeded in so many years. How could she suddenly succeed now? Perhaps the Almighty had something important to do with Yunshi and had left in a hurry, forgetting to tell her. Besides, hadn't he already brewed her medicine and written her a note? Ning Xiuama was a free and easy person. She couldn't always be so calculative. That wouldn't be like her. Ning Xiuama felt that ever since she started practicing the falling moon immortal technique and drank medicine every day, she had become more resistant to the verbal attacks of her inner demon. She seemed to have become more rational. Although the medicine was bitter, it was good medicine if it could cure illnesses. Perhaps this was why she still drank medicine every day, even though she didn't have a cold anymore. Ning Xiuama sat cross-legged and continued practicing the falling moon immortal technique. A day passed just like that. Shun Julie still hadn't returned, even when the sky was completely dark. Ning Xiuama went to bed early to avoid letting her imagination run wild again. She didn't have any dreams that night. The next day, Shun Julie still hadn't returned. Of course, no one would force her to drink that bitter medicine anymore. This was her only small benefit after he left. Ning Xiuama meditated for an entire day because she found that it was easier to pass the time by meditating. She didn't feel that time was too hard to bear. On the morning of the third day, when she once again walked around the heavenly sound peak, she finally took out the sound transmitting talisman and contacted Yelu Jing. She immediately asked him if he knew where her master was. Yelu Jing and seemed surprised. Didn't Master go to 5 Sound Island with someone? What? He didn't tell you? Ning Xiuama smiled. It's good that he told you. She chatted with Yelu Jing, and for a while before ending the communication with Yelu Jing, she sat on a stone bench in the courtyard and was lost in thought for a moment. She knew about the 5 Sound Island. It was the legendary island of lovers. It was said that all the creatures on the island were in pairs. There were pairs of mandarin ducks, pairs of elk, and even the trees on the island grew in pairs and intertwined together like lovers. Many eligible couples on the Tianxi continent liked to go to the island to pledge their lives. Legend had it that after pledging their lives there, They would receive the blessings of the island god and could grow old together. There were even some who went there to pledge their lives. Now that Shun, Julie, and Yunchi had gone there, what would they do? Ning Shuima seemed to recall the scenes of her reunion with the Almighty in the past 6 months. The Almighty and Yunchi drank tea together. The Almighty and Yunchi traveled together in the car. The Almighty painted for Yunchi. Chapter 1239. In just half a year, she'd seen the great god and Yunchi together 6 times, and she'd even seen them by accident. What about those she hadn't seen? How many times? In this half a year, the great god and Yunchi had met more frequently than usual. It was almost comparable to a date between a man and a woman. And this time, he'd gone to Lover's Island for 3 days. He wouldn't come back after his honeymoon, right? Ning Shuima's heart felt like it was suffocating a knot, and it was uncomfortable. She didn't want to let her imagination run wild like a resentful woman, but she couldn't help but let her imagination run wild. The sun gradually rose from the horizon. The sunlight was very warm on her body, but she felt a little cold. Unconsciously, she recalled the scenes of Shui Emo and Shun Julie in her previous life. She recalled that at the very end, Shun Julie had come together with Shui Emo. Not only had he sealed Shui Elon in the crystal coffin, but he'd also pushed Shui Emo to the position of the devil ancestor. In the end, he'd helped Shui Emo fight Shui Emo and coldly watched as Shui Emo's heart was pierced by Shui Emo's sword. Her memories of Shui Emo ended when Shun Julie looked down at her and said, "Shui Emo, this is retribution for betraying this lord." This sentence was like a heavy hammer striking a bloody stroke at the end of Shui Emo's story. When Ning Shuima occasionally thought of it, her heart would tighten. Her whole body would turn cold. Ning Shuima didn't want to care about who was right and who was wrong in her previous life. She only wanted to grasp this life. So when this memory occasionally popped up in her mind, she would fiercely slap it back down so that it wouldn't affect her judgment of love in this life. This time was the same. As soon as this memory popped up, she slapped it back down into the depths of her mind. She closed her eyes and meditated again. But after a while, she opened her eyes again. She couldn't calm her heart. She simply couldn't calm her heart now. It was like a tide had risen in her chest, and waves of negative emotions were surging up. Cultivating in this state of mind obviously wasn't good. Not only wouldn't it be effective, it might even cause chi deviation. She simply jumped off the bed, her gaze inadvertently sweeping over the fresh fruits on the table. Her gaze suddenly froze. Little Apple. Little Apple wasn't back yet. She had been so busy these past few days that she had forgotten about Little Apple. No, she had to find it. She opened the door and rushed out. However, after taking 2 steps, she suddenly stopped. Shui Elon must be out there looking for her. If he went out like this, he might fall into his demonic claws. She stood in place for a moment and suddenly couldn't help but laugh. What's wrong with me? So worried about personal gains and losses. She had always done things in a straightforward manner. When did she become so wishy-washy? When she was in her own era, she traveled the world alone and completed several seemingly impossible and dangerous missions on her own. She had never been so timid. The continent was so big. How could it be so easy to bump into Shuelon? Moreover, she had the art of disguise. As long as he hid his aura and was careful, he would be fine. She couldn't possibly not eat because she was afraid of choking to death, right? She walked to the front of the dressing table and looked at the elegant face inside. The corners of her lips curled up slightly. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, a thin and small middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance appeared in the mirror. That man's face was extremely ordinary. He was the type that couldn't be recognized if he was thrown into a crowd. Of course, if one looked closely, they would find that this man's eyes were extremely bright, like a black pearl in a still pool of water. Chapter 1240. Ning Shuma looked at her new appearance and clapped her hands in satisfaction. She walked out of the house and went straight to the Luo-Ine cliff. The Luo-Ine cliff was still filled with rolling clouds and sunlight. She closed her eyes and summoned the Ame Piercer. With a light wave of her hand, the Ame Piercer changed its appearance and became an extremely ordinary-looking longsword. The Ame Piercer suddenly swayed in the air as if it was expressing its extreme dissatisfaction with its new appearance. Ning Xiuma touched the hilt of the sword in amusement. Sorry for the inconvenience. It'll be done in a while. The Ame Piercer that was continuously drawing circles finally calmed down. Ning Xiuma jumped up and stood firmly on the Ame Piercer. This Ame Piercer seemed to have a short temper. Just as Ning Xiuma stood properly, it flew out like lightning. Ning Xiuma, did it know where to fly? Ning Xiuma estimated that she had left the Sun-Moon sect before putting away the Ame Piercer and walking down the mountain. Ning Xiuma thought about how she was going to find Kirin as she walked. Without alerting Xuelon, how was she going to find a Kirin in the vast sea of people from the perspective of an ordinary person? Forget it, she would search country by country. Even if she had to dig 3 feet into the ground, she would find Kirin. Soon, she reached the foot of the mountain. After going around a mountain rock, she suddenly stopped. Not far in front of her, there was a young man floating. That young man was dressed in black and was tall and straight. He had sharp eyebrows, bright eyes, a high-nosed bridge, and thin lips. He was extremely handsome. At this moment, he was standing there and looking up at the Buddha Lotus Mountain with a complicated gaze. The aura around him was extremely cold. It was as if he wanted to paste the words "strangers do not approach" all over. Ning Xiuma's heart skipped a beat. She paused and raised her eyebrows. Shijue. This man was actually Heir Shijue. After not seeing him for 10 years, his appearance had faded and he looked much more mature. Originally, he was like a cool big boy. Now, he was a reserved and deep man. Ning Xiuma did not expect to meet him as soon as she came down the mountain. When old friends met, her first reaction was to greet him. But as her lips moved, she seemed to have thought of something and did not open her mouth. She was a jinx and could easily jinx the friends around her. She did not want Shijue to meet with any misfortune, so it's better not to acknowledge him. Let's just be safe. With Ning Xiuma's current level of martial arts, if she didn't want to be discovered, even if she stood in front of someone, no one would be able to see her. She turned around and was about to leave quietly when she suddenly sensed something. She stopped in her tracks and looked towards Shiju's direction. Suddenly, 4 people appeared beside Shiju. Ning Xiuma was familiar with these 4 people as she had met them 10 years ago. They were the high-ranking law enforcers of the Bright King Mansion. Among them, Protector Xia had been ordered by Shijue to protect Ning Xiuma back then. At this moment, the 4 of them surrounded Shijue and bowed together. Heir, we've been looking for you for 9 years. Fortunately, we've finally found you. Please follow us back to the Wise King's residence. Everyone in the Wise King's residence is looking forward to your return to take charge. Ning Xiuma was puzzled. Shijue had actually escaped from the Wise King's residence for 9 years? Sure enough, he was a rebellious child. He was addicted to running away from home. No wonder he looked so old. Shijue frowned slightly and said coldly, I won't go back. Protector Xia bowed. Heir, we know that you're looking for Miss Ning, but it's too weak to search alone. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.